Chapter 672. It took some time for Xiao He to finish cooking, probably because the dishes were too sumptuous that day, and her hands were trembling too much. In addition, she had been talking nonstop during the meal, so it took her some time to finish cooking. The candles on the table had been lit a long time ago. The wind whistled out from the 1,000-mile wind corridor. Even though the windows were protected by the formations, the whistling sound could still be heard. Some airflow came in through the cracks in the wooden boards, making the candles flicker like will-o'-the-wisps. Xiao He could vaguely understand the conversation between Taiping and Lu Shui, her face turning pale, her body trembling slightly. Lu Shui stared into Taiping's eyes. The city guard pin was already in his hand, and the sword bracelet was no longer trembling, ready for a fight. "Let's go!" Xiao He yelled loudly as she stood in front of Lu Shui. A few tails exuding a strong devil energy shot up into the air, heading toward Taiping. The candles swayed more violently, and the air seemed to be torn apart. She was a formidable assassin of the old ones, and had lived with Lu Shui for more than 100 years. Though she had neglected her cultivation a bit, her cultivation state was still much higher than it was many years ago. This was a desperate strike from her. Even the elders of the Zhongzhou school had a hard time dealing with it. Yet, Taiping didn't even glance at her. All he did was look at Lu Shui in silence. Damn it! A crimson feather appeared out of nowhere. It passed through those powerful foxtails and pierced through Xiao He's body easily, nailing her to the wall with a thud. Many years ago, in the Sea God Temple outside Haizhou City, the lone sword pierced through her body in the same spot. Taiping and Jingjiu were the two swordsmen with the highest cultivation states in Chaotian, so they were well aware of the weakest and most fatal spot of a human being or a devil being. Xiao He was nailed to the wall by the crimson feather, spitting out blood incessantly. It seemed that she would die soon. "Let her go," said Lu Shui sharply. Suddenly, he discovered a problem. This was because he could not even lift his right hand. He could not even hold the city guarding pen. Taiping looked into his eyes in silence. His eyes were filled with tranquility. A determined look appeared in Lu Shui's eyes. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. The ancient prose on the desk rose with the wind and welcomed the blood flower. The book made of blood and sweat blocked Taiping's sight. There was a buzz. Taiping disappeared. The crimson bird appeared in the sky and flew toward the ancient prose. Whoosh, whoosh, the ancient poem burst into flames and instantly turned into ashes. With that, Lu Shui finally regained some control over his body. He raised the city-guarding pin and swung it at the little red bird. A rainbow crushed the candlelight and illuminated the room. It was about to break the window and leave. Even if he couldn't stop the other party, he could at least warn them. The vermilion bird flaps its wings. Two huge wings that looked like flames appeared in the room, but they had no real temperature. They absorbed all the rainbow created by the city-guarding pen. Lu Shui adjusted all the righteous energy in his body, opened his folding fan, and waved it at the two wings of flame. The wind became stronger, but the wings of flame didn't disperse. Instead, they grew stronger. Between the two wings of flame, the little red bird looked at him in silence with its black eyes, devoid of any emotion. Lu Shui knew that this was the last moment. He ordered the lone sword to slash at himself without hesitation. He didn't know what Taiping wanted to do, but he knew that he couldn't let things go on like this. It was a loud bang. The wings of flame started to burn violently, and then suddenly died out. Gradually, the faint sound of a flute could be heard. Before dawn, Lu Shui led Xiao He out of the inn and entered the 1,000-mile wind corridor in the horse-drawn carriage. Even though the horses were raised in Yamatai for generations, it was still difficult for them to move forward in the howling wind after entering the depths of the wind corridor. Lu Shui and Xiao He didn't intend to get off the carriage, nor did they ride on their swords. It was obvious that they were severely injured. After an unknown amount of time, they finally arrived at the legendary Serpent Lake. The lotus leaves on the surface of the lake had been overturned by the strong wind. Fortunately, they were all special species, so they didn't have to worry about breaking them. However, they looked like masked girls with their skirts flying up, and the lotus flowers looked like jewelry that was about to fall off. The scholars of Yamatai finally noticed the commotion here. They hurried over and saw Lu Shui and Xiao He in the carriage with pale faces and bloodstains all over their bodies. They couldn't help but be startled and called out, "Martial uncle, what happened?" The poor horse finally didn't have to fight against the strong wind anymore, so it was led to a shelter to rest. Lu Shui and Xiao He were carried into Yamatai by the scholars. Many guests from various sects came to the house. When they saw this scene, they couldn't help but be shocked and stood up one after another. Rin Xianzhu noticed the earring on Xiao He's earlobe. The earring should be made of a ruby. It was as red as blood and looked very beautiful. Lu Shui and Xiao He were severely injured, so they didn't have any delays. Soon, they were sent to the depths of Yamatai and arrived in front of Shi Yun. In Yamatai, Shi Yun's status was the highest, except for those old teachers. His expression changed abruptly, and he fed the two of them with medicinal pellets as quickly as possible. Then, he helped Lu Shui up and started to treat his injuries. It didn't take long for Lu Shui to wake up, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked around. Shi Yun understood what he meant. He waved his hand to let the scholars in the house leave and asked what happened. Last night, Taiping Jinren came. It seemed that he was going to use the two-mind connection of the Guocheng Temple to control my mind, just as we had guessed years ago to control Tian Jingren. Thinking of the encounter last night, Lu Shui still had a lingering fear, saying, "I used the city guard pen and the lone sword, but they didn't work." Just as I was about to die, the bone flute that young master gave me suddenly flew out. I don't know why, but he acted very scared and left just like that. Shi Yun was very surprised, asking, "What did he come to Yamatai for?" Lu Shui shook his head, saying, "I don't know." After a pause, he continued in a low voice, "I suspect it has something to do with teacher becoming a saint." Hearing this, Shi Yun's expression became even more solemn. He looked at him in silence for a long time, saying, "In a few days, the inauguration ceremony for the sect master of Aoyama will begin. Are you going there?" This was the original plan of Yamatai, but now that Taiping Jinren had suddenly appeared in the 1,000 Miles Wind Corridor and Lu Shui was still wounded, why did Shi Yun want him to leave in a hurry? There were many questions hidden in this. Lu Shui quickly figured it out, asking, "Are you worried?" Shi Yun nodded, saying, "We have to be careful about this matter." "Okay," Lu Shui said after a moment of silence. Shi Yun continued, "Xiao He will stay in the house. I'll take good care of her." There was another meaning hidden in these words, which Lu Shui understood and accepted, saying, "Thank you very much, big brother." Xiao He knew that he was about to leave, feeling a bit uneasy, asking in a trembling voice, "What's wrong?" "It's nothing," Lu Shui comforted her. "I hope it's nothing," Shi Yun said. "Today we drove to Mo, more than 800 kilometers, so tired." Chapter 673. While the little red bird was flying against the wind in the 1,000-mile wind corridor, an old man with sparse hair and a red nose went to the Guocheng Temple or returned to the Guocheng Temple. The Zen master was in the snowland, and the old chief monk had passed away. The only thing the Guocheng Temple could use to suppress the highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects was the Great Formation of the Mountain Gate. But for some reason, the Great Formation had no effect on the old man, just like it had 100 years ago. This ugly and impressive old man was naturally the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect entered the Guocheng Temple through the back door with great familiarity. He found the kitchen where he used to cook for many years, opened a hidden box, and took out a still warm braised pig's trotter. Taking a bite, he mumbled, "After so many years, they still only know how to hide in these places." The next moment, his expression changed abruptly, and sorrow appeared in his eyes. He slowly spat out a broken tooth, no longer in the mood to eat. Putting the braised pig's trotter back, he said to the smiling old monk, "Don't laugh." The old monk said with a smile, The chief monk often said that we should laugh at the affairs of the human world. I've gotten used to it. Though such things have happened many times, I'm still not used to it. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect touched dozens of his hair with his greasy hand and asked the old monk, "You, the chief monk of the instruction hall, are also his people." This old monk was the chief monk of the instruction hall of the Guoqing Temple. In the absence of a Zen master, he was the one with the highest seniority and status in the Guoqing Temple. When I first entered the temple, I learned the script from the chief monk. The chief monk said with a smile. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sat down and counted with his fingers, "You, the former chief monk of the law hall, and there must be many more. Doesn't this Guoqing temple belong to him? Why does the immortal make it so troublesome?" The chief monk of the instruction hall sighed. The disciples are useless, and their states are too low to help the chief monk. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said disapprovingly, "Your cultivation state is indeed not as good as mine, but you would still be a formidable figure in the Guoqing temple." The chief monk of the script instruction hall said, "I'm not as good as Zen master. I'm not as good as Chao Yuan." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect suddenly changed the topic, asking, "Are you ready? My Buddhist studies aren't good, and my cultivation level is low, so I spend all my time studying curse formations." The chief monk of the instruction hall said with a smile, "Nobody is more familiar with the spell formation by the heavenly well than I am." Then what are we waiting for? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect rubbed his red nose and said, "Let's go." The sea breeze caressed his sparse hair and bald head. Then he came to the East Sea and stood beside the extremely gloomy heavenly well. Standing by the cliff's edge, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect lowered his head and looked down at the darkness, saying expressionlessly, "The curse formation here is so powerful. Are you sure you can dismantle it?" Like I said, I've spent my whole life studying how to dismantle this formation. The chief monk of the script instruction hall went on, "Of course, many of the spells in this formation were set up by Shui Yu nunnery, which is beyond my ability." No sooner had he said this than a nun Shui Yu nunnery walked out from among the rocks on the cliff. She said to the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect expressionlessly, "After dismantling this formation, teacher will have to employ the demonic cultivation of all his life to break the 33 levels of heaven in the heavenly well from the bottom of the ocean. You should be well aware of what will happen by then. Are you sure you won't show any mercy?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect laughed loudly. "I like it when you, the highly achieved swordsman of the orthodox sects, mock me, a great grandmaster of the deviant sects, for not being ruthless enough. The wind of the 1,000-mile wind corridor, the water of the East Sea, what else was needed? Both of them were the most important passages leading to the underworld from Chaotian." Speaking of the passages, the most famous and largest one was located in the deep part of the ocean. There was a huge whirlpool there called the Secret Realm of Singing Spring. The Thunder Soul wood of the Aoyama sect came from this place. One early morning in the early winter, a dreadful shriek pierced through the rumbling sound of falling into the water and traveled a long distance in the ocean. After a long while, the tranquil surface of the ocean suddenly bulged, and a huge dark shadow could be vaguely seen under the water. In the next moment, countless white lines appeared on the surface of the ocean. Those dark shadows and white lines were the traces left by the demons. Over the years, the underworld had raised and driven a great number of demons to this place in order to bring chaos to Chaotian. Those demons hiding in the muddy river had all been killed by Lu Ci's sword more than 100 years ago, but a great number of demons were still hiding in the boundless ocean. Along with the shriek, all the demons came to the edge of the huge whirlpool and showed themselves slowly. They looked at the small black speck in the sky, expressing their absolute submission. The small black speck looked more like a thin black line, because the tail of the dark phoenix was indeed a bit long. Flying between the empty realm and the real world, the dark phoenix looked down at those demons on the surface of the ocean with a nonchalant expression in his eyes, as if he were the ruler of the world. Even though he was the principal guard of Aoyama in the heavenly arrival state, he had no way to summon and control these powerful demons. Not to mention that he had to order these demons to throw themselves into the huge whirlpool as a blood sacrifice that day. The reason he could summon so many demons to this place was that his whistling contained the spiritual soul imprint left by the immortal Taiping. And it was also because countless tiny amulets were hidden in the colorful feathers ruffled by the chaotic wind, falling onto the surface of the ocean incessantly. There was a large island on the other side of the distant ocean, and there was a high mountain on the east side of the island. The high mountain was a giant. The shriek of the dark phoenix was so faint that it couldn't be heard when it reached the island from the boundless ocean. Even those sensitive spirits couldn't hear it, because they were still sleeping soundly in the flowers. The giant opened his eyes and woke up. He raised his hand to rub his eyes, saying "Aya" in a low voice. Was this the buzzing of mosquitoes mentioned by Jingyang? It was indeed annoying. What he didn't expect was that his casual murmur sounded like thunder to those spirits in the forest, which was also very annoying. The translucent flowers unfolded, and the spirits flew out with their spears and arrows in their hands. They kept on rebuking the giant as tall as a high mountain, demonstrating their bravery and fearlessness. The clouds and fog dispersed. The immortal Tan walked slowly to the peak top along the stone steps, looking at the sun on the other side of the ocean of clouds. It was unclear if it was because the morning sun was too bright or for some other reason, but his forehead looked even wider than before, but he was still wearing the same plain cotton cloth. Rin Xianzhu has gone to Yamatai. Bai Jinren walked to his side and said expressionlessly, "Regardless of whether Bu Xiao can become the saint or not, I hope he will remain neutral like he has been over the years." The immortal Tan was aware that she was under a great deal of pressure, even though she said so nonchalantly, "The flowing clouds don't contend with the clear wind, and the wind can't disperse the clouds," he said. Bai Jinren didn't respond to him, asking, "Would you like to go with me to the grand ceremony of Aoyama?" Looking at the distant horizon, the immortal Tan suddenly said, "Back when I first came to Cloud Dream, you said something to me. Look at the horizon and die in front of me." Bai Jinren pressed. The immortal Tan pulled back his gaze and asked her seriously, "Are you sure you want to go?" Bai Jinren said nonchalantly, "Don't worry. I'll strike after one of them dies." The immortal Tan sighed and said, "That's Aoyama. Are you going to watch them grow stronger and stronger?" Bai Jinren pressed. The immortal Tan said, "The flowers and trees, the spirits, the sun, and the stars have their own reasons for being strong. How can they be interrupted by an external force?" Bai Jinren remained silent, thinking that there was no rule that couldn't be interrupted as long as the external force was strong enough, even if it was the cause and effect. The immortal Tan knew that he couldn't persuade her, so he asked, "Even if either Taiping or Jingyang dies, how can we break the great formation of Aoyama?" Bai Jinren said, "If Taiping intends to fight with Jingyang, they will have to fight for the great formation of Aoyama. This is our chance." The immortal Tan suddenly felt tired, saying, "We haven't eaten the dishes cooked by little Zao for many years." "The dishes she cooks are not delicious," Bai Jinren said. The immortal Tan said, "I went to the 3,000 nunnery to see her, but I don't know when she will wake up. What about you?" Bai Jinren said nonchalantly while looking at him, "Your talent and cultivation is far superior to your peers, even better than mine, but why haven't you taken that step yet? When will you truly wake up?" Having said that, she turned around and walked toward the clouds and fog. It was unknown where she was. It was unclear where she was. She should still be on the Cloud Dream Mountain, but it seemed that she was somewhere else. The shapeless stairs led to a very high place. The black rocks were hovering in the air in silence, forming a formation that looked simple but was actually very complicated. Bai Jinren walked to the center of the black rocks and waved his sleeve a few times. An extremely pure energy spread out and landed evenly on the black rocks. The black rocks began to emit a gloomy and cold glow. If one stared at them for a long time, they would think that they were the path leading to the abyss. In the next moment, The black rocks began to rotate slowly, their glows flashing, as if they had turned into the stars. However, the stars were much sparser than the stars in Chaotian. Perhaps they were the real stars. A fireball could be vaguely seen in the distance, but strangely enough, it didn't give off any heat, only a cold intent. Bai Jinren knelt down toward the patch of the starry sky, saying, "Bai Yuan greets the great ancestor." Chapter 674. After a long while, an awe-inspiring but not indifferent voice rang out in the distance. "What's the matter?" Bai Jinren didn't dare lift his head to look at the patch of empty space, even though there was no real figure in that patch of empty space. He said in a low voice, "This young master would like to ask the great master to come back." The voice grew even more ethereal and distant, as if it shouldn't be heard in the human world. "What?" Bai Jinren said. "Lien Sanyue is dead, and Chao Yuan is severely wounded. If the great master comes back, you can kill all of them easily and prevent Jing Yang from ascending again." The voice rang out again after a while. "There are 2 more fairy books left by me, 1 primary and 1 accessory. Who will take them this time?" The speaker was none other than the last ascendant in Chaotian, the fairy lady Bai Run. It was unclear what secret method the Zhongzhou school had employed to communicate with the fairy ladies in the upper world. What was even more puzzling was that the fairy lady Bai Ren seemed to be not far from Chaotian, which was why she could respond to the call of the Zhongzhou school so quickly. The fairy lady Bai Run had left 3 primary and 3 accessory fairy books for the Zhongzhou school. Under extreme circumstances, she could indeed send a piece of fairy awareness back to Chaotian, but it was a difficult task, requiring a suitable fairy body to take it. Last time, when a piece of the fairy awareness of the fairy lady Bai Run came to Chaotian, Bai Zhao had spent many years tempering the fairy book, and he had to pay the price of having his soul and spirit dispersed. Bai Zhao was still asleep at the moment, and Shui Yu nunnery and the Aoyama sect were keeping an eye on the 3,000 nunnery. Moreover, she had a great deal of fairy energy in her body. If Bai Run came to Chaotian again, she would disintegrate immediately and even destroy the whole of Daiyuan City. Bai Jinren was the most suitable candidate, but she wasn't willing to pay such a price. "Please, come back in person," she said calmly. The voice remained silent for a long time. When it rang out again, it sounded exceedingly desolate. "Do you know what your request means?" If the fairy lady returned to Chaotian after successfully ascending, it would be almost impossible for her to ascend again. Our ancestor cared for the common people and could not bear to leave. Since that was the case, what was the difference between guarding outside and guarding inside? Bai Jinren said calmly, "Back then, the banished immortal of the fallen immortal island returned because he was afraid of the unknown. If you return, it will be to protect this continent and the human race. If you don't return this time, no one will be able to suppress Aoyama's sect anymore. Those sword cultivators will definitely plunder the chi of heaven and earth for their own use. They might even mobilize the evil sects to take over Kunlun's sect's spiritual veins. If Jing Jiao really ascends with the chi of heaven and earth, what will happen to this world? That spring rain happened more than 100 years ago, and enlightened Master Lu Xi had left this world for a very long time. According to the edict he left behind, Jing Jiao took over as the sect leader of Aoyama. However, no one expected that Fang Jingtian would suddenly reach the heavens during the sect leader ceremony. A Piao floated up from the stone steps. He was forced out of Aoyama by Taiping Jinren. More than 100 years later, he reached the heavens in Zhaoga City and forced Fang Jingtian back to the Hermit Peaks. The sect leader ceremony that had been postponed for a long time was about to begin again. The Aoyama sect was undoubtedly the leader of the cultivation world, so this sect leader ceremony was naturally the most important event. All the cultivation sects would send their guests to congratulate the sect leader ceremony. Unexpectedly, but it was also reasonable that the first person to arrive in Aoyama was Lu Shui. He arrived too early, and the preparations for the sect leader ceremony were far from complete. However, Aoyama didn't really treat him as a guest because of his relationship with Jing Jiao. Lu Shui went to Tianguang Peak and met Guinan Shan, Gu Han, Ruzhui, and others, talking about what had happened over the years. Guan Anshan and others welcomed his arrival, but they felt it strange, wondering why he came to Tianguang Peak. Shouldn't he go to Shinma Peak to visit the immortal sect master first? It wasn't until they saw Lu Shui off the peak and saw Lu Shui cut some old bamboos in front of the manor cave, where Elder Bai Rujing used to live, that they understood Lu Shui's intention. They couldn't help but laugh and shake their heads speechlessly. Zhuo Ruzhui led him to Shinma Peak by riding the sword. When they arrived at the peak top, Lu Shui took over Gu Qing's work after bowing to Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu, and started boiling the tea. After drinking the tea and chatting with each other, Lu Shui started cutting the bamboos and repairing the broken bamboo chair. He was an important figure in Yamatai now, so he started doing these chores as soon as he returned to Aoyama. It would be ridiculous in the eyes of others, but he did it so naturally. Even though Zhuo Ruzhui had spent a long time in the royal palace of the Chu Kingdom in the illusionary realm of the Green Sky Mirror, he still wasn't used to doing such chores. He came before Gu Qing and said something in a low voice, which seemed to have something to do with hot pot. The bamboo chair needed to be repaired, so it was impossible for him to lie on it. Jing Jiu walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down, his feet a few feet away from the ocean of clouds. He closed his eyes, bathing in the sunlight of early spring, as if he were on the verge of falling asleep. It was unclear when Ada had returned to Shinma Peak. He climbed onto Jing Jiu's shoulder without anyone noticing. He crouched there with his eyes closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Zhao Leiyu stood on the other side of the cliff with her hands folded behind her back. It was unclear what she was thinking. Yuan Chu was preparing for the grand ceremony of the sect master in the Taoist hall. Ping Yongka and Apyao hadn't met Lu Shui many times, so they were quite curious about this rumored big brother. They squatted by his side and asked him about the events in the past. Lu Shui answered their questions with a smile as he repaired the bamboo chair. All the guests had arrived that day. The spring sun shone on Shinma Peak, making it feel warm. Such a warm day was most suitable for eating hot pot. Just like those cold days, those happy days, and those sad days. All kinds of delicious ingredients were placed on the table. The yin and yang faced each other in the hot pot, with steam rising. Zhao Leiyu sat upright on the seat of honor, with her long chopsticks placed in front of her eyes in silence. Her eyes were calm and tranquil, without any intention of competing. Zhuo Ruzhui, Yuan Chu, Ping Yongka, and Apyao looked serious, as if they were tigers about to pounce. Gu Qing brought a bowl of clear soup to the edge of the cliff. Jing Jiu lay on the newly repaired bamboo chair, turned twice, and grunted with satisfaction. He took the hot soup and drank it in one gulp, feeling even more satisfied. Lu Shui wasn't by the table. He was cutting the meat and cleaning the vegetables with a small sword. It was indeed the second sharpest famous sword in the world. He didn't need to use the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church to defrost the deep-frozen beef and mutton, and he could easily cut them into thin slices, cubes, or granules, and put them into the soup to taste different delicacies. The beef tripes of various colors were cut into different flowers, and the vegetables were arranged into a big pot of flowers blooming around the hot pot. Zhao Leiyu lifted the chopsticks and picked up a piece of meat and put it in her mouth, grunting with satisfaction. The chopsticks felt like the wind or the rain, but more like a sword. A few sword lights flashed by, and the meat in the pot was gone instantly. Shuriwet Peak has sent a lot of meat here. There's no need to be in such a hurry. Lu Shui walked over with a large plate of freshly cut meat in his hands. Looking at the empty hot pot, he couldn't help but smile, his expression full of affection. Chapter 675. Apyao's cultivation state was not as high as Lu Shui's, so she couldn't speak due to the scalding heat. All she could do was give Lu Shui a thumbs-up gesture. Ping Yongjiao remarked with an admiring expression, "He's indeed the big brother. His sword work is really good." Yuan Chu suddenly recalled that he and Gu Qing had discussed the ranking of the disciples of the Shinma Peak many years ago after the sword trial. He glanced at Gu Qing reflexively. Gu Qing's countenance was the same as usual, as if he hadn't heard what Ping Yongka had said. Yuan Chu still felt uneasy. He put down the chopsticks and walked to the edge of the cliff after eating some more meat. As he came to the side of the bamboo chair, he squatted down and said softly, "According to the sect rules, you have to take out the inherited heaven sword on the day of the grand ceremony and accept the worship of all the disciples of Aoyama." What do you think? Gu Qing had mentioned this issue when he came back from Zhaoga City. Whoever had the inherited heaven sword would be the sect master of Aoyama. This was what Jing Jiu had said to Fang Jingtian back then. No matter whether it was because of the sect rules or this statement, the inherited heaven sword would show up in the world sooner or later. Jing Jiu said while rubbing Ada, "Let's do it this way." Ada closed his eyes and hugged Cold Cicada tightly, pretending that he was asleep and didn't hear what Jing Jiu had said. It didn't take long for the hot pot to be finished. The disciples of Shuriwa Peak came over to clean up the mess, bringing with them an elder of Shuriwa Peak and a few young female disciples of Qingrong Peak. The elder of Shuriwa Peak bowed to Jing Jiu respectfully and said, "Immortal Sect Master, your ceremonial robe is ready. Would you like to try it on?" The young female disciples of Qingrong Peak bowed to Jing Jiu while holding the ceremonial robe in their hands, suppressing their nervousness, curiosity, and excitement. Jing Jiu didn't expect it to be so troublesome to be the sect master of Aoyama. He shot a glance at Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu hurriedly explained, 100 years ago, immortal Lu Xi had passed away less than 10 years ago. According to the sect rules, everything was kept simple, but today, listening to someone explain the sect rules of Aoyama was a troublesome and boring affair. This was the reason why Jing Jiu didn't want to see Yuan Qijing back then. He stood up from the bamboo chair and said to the elder of Shuriwe Peak helplessly, "Hurry up." Zhe, Rizhui, and the others looked at each other and almost laughed out loud when they saw the stone door of the cave slowly closing. Lu Shui wiped the lone sword on his sleeve and then buckled his wrist, turning it back into a sword rope. If it had been in the past, the lone sword would have been extremely annoyed and would have trembled incessantly after being used to cut so much flesh and not cleaned thoroughly. But today, perhaps because it was too close to Jing Jiu, it appeared to be extremely well-behaved. Lu Shui walked to the edge of the cliff and stood beside Zhao Lei. Zhao Lei shot him a glance, saying nothing. Over the last 100 years, the two of them had had a long talk when Jing Jiu was unconscious in the Guecheng Temple, but they had seldom seen each other. Yet, they were the earliest followers of Jing Jiu. To put it more precisely, they were the followers Jing Yang had left for Aoyama. In this sense, their relationship was special, and they had a special tacit understanding. They had joined hands to kill Lo Huainan in Guiyun City and pursued Taiping Zhenren together. They didn't need to talk to each other to know what each other wanted to do. Yet, Zhao Lei had something to tell him that day, because it was very important. He can go now. Hearing this, Lu Shui fell silent for a while before saying, "Let's go then." The path toward heaven didn't have to travel together all the time. "What do you want to do after he leaves?" "I mean other than cultivation," Zhao Lei asked while looking at him. Lu Shui looked at the other side of the ocean of clouds. It was the distant horizon. "I want to call the wind and summon the rain." "I want to travel 1,000 miles in an instant. I want to travel the 4 seas." Lu Shui smiled and said, "I still want to sleep in a dream and wake up in a dream." Note, I think the pharaoh means to sleep in the dream and wake up in the reality. It would be good if the reality was like the dream. On the other hand, it meant that the dream was still in the body and one was still in the dream. No, man. Zhao Lei understood what he meant, but she didn't understand what he meant. It was then that the stone door of the manor cave was opened again along with a heavy sound of friction, and Jing Jiu walked out from it. The elder of Shuriwa Peak and a few young girls of Qingrong Peak followed behind him, their faces full of uneasiness. "What's wrong?" Zhao Lei approached him. "I don't like it," said Jing Jiu. Zhao Lei stepped forward and straightened his collar, saying, "Yeah, you look better in white." Seeing this scene, Lu Shui let out a smile, saying nothing. After staying on Shima Peak for 3 days, Lu Shui said he wanted to visit the other peaks. He hadn't been back for more than 100 years. Gu Qing and the others understood his intention. Jing Jiu waved his hand while lying on the bamboo chair. The monkeys suddenly screamed loudly. Gu Qing didn't pay any attention to them after listening to them for a while. Lu Shui didn't ride the sword. He walked down the stone steps with his hands folded behind his back, looking at the vines and the trickling water on the cliffs. It seemed that he was interested in everything. It didn't take long before he arrived in front of an old wooden hut. He halted his steps and walked in to have a look at the black tea, murmuring to himself, "Is this the hut built by Gu Qing?" Outside the wooden hut, the monkeys screamed one after another. Jing Jiu glanced outside the window and said with furrowed brows, "It's so noisy." The whole world suddenly quieted down. After leaving the wooden hut, Lu Shui continued walking down the peak. It was early spring, and the great formation of Aoyama was protected, so the mountain wind was cool and pleasant. Yet he took out the folding fan and waved it slowly. A flower could be vaguely seen on the fan. Among the 9 peaks of Aoyama, Shenma Peak was the loneliest. Only Qingrong Peak was relatively close to it, looking at it. Lu Shui came to the foot of Qingrong Peak and told the disciple on duty of Qingrong Peak his name, saying that he wanted to go on a tour. Those young girls of Qingrong Peak knew that he was the rumored Lu Shui, feeling surprised. They bowed to him hastily, indicating that they didn't need to inform their masters and that he could do as he pleased. Seeing his figure disappear on the mountain path, these young girls couldn't control their emotions any longer and started talking about him. "I heard that Senior Master Lu's cultivation partner is a vixen, which is why he can't stay in Aoyama. He is full of righteous energy today. He doesn't look like a devil at all. Marrying a vixen doesn't mean he is a devil. The emperor in Zhaoga City is the son of a vixen. So what?" Speaking of which, the way Senior Master Lu waved the fan doesn't look like a cultivation practitioner, but more like a scholar. "You little fool, Senior Master Lu is an important figure in Yamatai now, and he is a scholar to begin with." Lu Shui had no idea what those young girls were talking about behind him. He strolled slowly on the mountain path, stopping to smell the flowers when he saw them, and touching the ancient pine trees when he saw them. It seemed that he was quite interested in them. Returning to Aoyama after so many years, he was like a child, curious about all the sceneries and changes. As he arrived at the Pear Stream Valley, an elder of Qingrong Peak was waiting for him. Lu Shui said, "Big sister, I heard that the pear wine is quite delicious. Could you give me some a drink?" The elder of Qingrong Peak was taken aback slightly, and then signaled her disciple to fetch a jar of wine from the cave. Lu Shui bowed to express his gratitude and glided up to the autumn platform with the jar of pear wine in his hand. The autumn platform was the second highest place on Qingrong Peak. When the weather was good, one could see the huge black rock on the peak top and the flowering tree behind it clearly. If one was lucky or unlucky, one could even see the peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang. The weather was good that day. Sitting in a pavilion on the autumn platform, Lu Shui sipped the pure and refreshing pear wine, looking in that direction with a faint smile. The fog had gradually dispersed, revealing the scene on the top of Qingrong Peak. Leaning against the black rock, Nan Wang held a small wine jar in his hand, looking at the sky and thinking about something. He looked quite relaxed, not as drunk as before. Looking in that direction, Lu Shui had a warm smile in his eyes as he took a sip of the wine. A gentle breeze rose up, brushing off the flower petals on the flowering tree and landing on Nan Wang, as if they were caressing him. Chapter 676. This Senior Master Lu is really a weirdo. Not only did he come to the peak to enjoy the scenery, but he even asked for the peak master's favorite pear wine. He doesn't consider himself an outsider at all. Looking at the pavilion on the autumn platform, a young girl of Qingrong Peak said with furrowed brows, "He dares stare at the peak master at this moment. Isn't he afraid that the peak master will kill him?" The elder said, "Don't talk nonsense. Show some respect. You should know that he is the favorite disciple of the immortal sect master." The young girl asked incredulously, isn't the favorite disciple of the great grandmaster of Jingyang, the master of Shinma Peak? The elders said, "Nobody knows whether young brother Liu or the master of Shinma Peak has a higher cultivation state, but he must be the most trusted person of the immortal sect master." After finishing the jar of pear wine, Liu Shisui left Qingrong Peak and went to Yunqing Peak. The sword wills on Yunqing Peak were so strong that nobody could cultivate and live on it for a long time, except for the top figures like Zhao Liu. As such, the elders and disciples lived at the foot of the peak. The green smoke could be seen everywhere in the courtyard, and the rumbling of the magic treasures could be heard, which was the sound of repairing the flying swords. Liu Shisui told his identity and asked to see the peak master of Yunqing. The former peak master of Yunqing, Jin Sadeo, was too ashamed to stay here, but he didn't have the courage to enter the hermit peaks, so he chose to travel outside. The current peak master of Yunqing was Ping Yongka. He had stayed on Shima Peak for a few days, but he was driven here by Gu Qing in the end, even though Zhao Liu had hinted that he could live on Shinma Peak. Gu Qing used the sect rules as an excuse, and Ping Yongka's cultivation was different from everybody else's, so he should live here. A few days ago, Liu Shisui and Ping Yongka were eating hot pot on Shinma Peak, so it was unclear why he wanted to see him now. When the elders and disciples heard Liu Shisui's request, they wryly smiled and said that the new peak lord didn't say anything after arriving. He directly went up the mountain and didn't come back down. Hearing this answer, Liu Shisui found it quite interesting. He declined the others' request to accompany him and walked towards Yunqing Peak alone. The Yunqing Peak was the sword peak. There were only stones and swords on the peak. There were no flowers, plants, trees, streams, or beautiful scenery. As such, unlike when he was on Shima Peak and Qingrong Peak, he didn't see any sceneries along the way and soon disappeared in the clouds. It didn't take long for him to reach the top of the sword peak. The sunlight could finally penetrate the clouds and illuminate the desolate cliff. A few iron eagles let out a cry that sounded like metal striking stone. They flapped their wings and flew around the cliff. Liu Shisui walked to the front of the cliff and saw 3 caves side by side. He sat in the one on the left curiously and touched the surrounding stone walls, thinking that these caves were no different from the monks on the walls of the Guochang Temple. He jumped down from the cave and walked to the cave on the right, tilting his head to look at Ping Yongka, who had his eyes closed and seemed to be in a deep sleep. He stared at Ping Yongka for a long time, but he couldn't find anything. He straightened his body and shook his head, murmuring to himself, "It's indeed a bit odd." Then he descended Yunqing Peak, as if he had come here just to take a look at Ping Yongka. Next, he went to Shuriwe Peak and found a desolate medicine garden. He picked an extraordinary 7-leaf lotus from under a rock and put it into his mouth and chewed it raw. Then he went to a deserted magic pill house that had been abandoned many years ago. He found a bottle of magic pills from under a shelf and swallowed all of them. Both the desolate medicine garden and the deserted magic pill house were located in remote places on Shuriwe Peak, and nobody took care of them. Even the elders and disciples of Shuriwe Peak didn't know of their existence. It was unclear how Liu Shisui knew about these 2 places and could even find the 2 items in them. What was more puzzling was that the 7-leaf lotus and the magic pills in the bottle should be extremely potent. Didn't he fear that something would go wrong if he swallowed them? After swallowing the magic pills, Liu Shisui sat quietly in the tripod for a while to digest the power of the magic pills. Then, he jumped down from the window at the back of the magic pill house. The whistling mountain wind blew in his face, followed by the usual clouds and fog. His feet landed on the ground, but it wasn't the bottom of the peak, but a stone beam hidden in the clouds and fog. The footprints on the stone beam that looked like bamboo leaves had been wiped away by the mountain wind of more than 100 years. Liu Shisui walked to Shilai Peak along the stone beam without alerting anyone. He went to a place at the back of the peak, where he picked up some books and read them for a while. Then, he went to Liangwang Peak and headed toward the peak top along the straight mountain path that wound around the cliff. Seeing the sword lights in the sky and those young and vigorous disciples, A gratified expression showed in his eyes. After arriving at the peak top, there was nowhere else to go. Guhan left the manor cave after hearing the news and came to the cliff's edge. Before he could say a word to Jingjiu, he saw a bright sword light illuminating the sky and shooting toward the distant Shangda Peak. A disciple of Liangwang Peak asked with an envious and yearning expression, "Is that the lone sword?" Guhan nodded his head. A disciple said with some dissatisfaction, "The immortal sect master is so biased." Martial Uncle Liu is now a member of Yamatsai, and the lone sword is a precious treasure of Aoyama. How can he keep it? Guhan glanced at him expressionlessly and said, "If you knew how much he had done for Aoyama, you wouldn't ask such a stupid question." The cliffs of Shangda Peak were covered with snow, and even the air was so cold that it felt like swallowing countless small knives when one breathed in. The cedars rustled, and a light snow fell. Lu Shui didn't care about the snow on his face and body. He took a deep breath, showing a longing and satisfied expression. He passed by the residence of the disciples of Shangda Peak silently, and flew to the steep cliffs of the back of the peak, landing on a big stone. Yuan Chu and Yushan had watched the stars here many years ago. Lu Shui didn't know about this. He stood on the stone and looked at the peaks of Aoyama, his expression growing cold, like the wind and snow on Shangda Peak. Then, he turned around and disappeared into the cliffs. The sunlight shone down from a high place, illuminating the ground. The dead dog crouched under the sunlight in silence, looking like a black mountain. The sword jail was as quiet as usual. It seemed that nobody had been here. The door leading to the Hermit Peaks had been opened. Lu Shui walked among the green hills and low peaks and stopped in front of a patch of wildflowers in the end. The patch of wildflowers grew very well, covering the whole mountain and the fields and even blocking the sky and the sun. Jingjiu didn't pick up the bamboo flute among the wildflowers. All he did was look at a spot on the peak in silence. Through the sea of flowers, the black soil, and the stony wall, he saw Fong Jingtian, who was sleeping soundly. Jingjiu stepped on the flowers and ascended the seemingly still ocean of clouds along with the fragrance of the flowers. He broke through the ocean of clouds and came to the front of the distant stony mountain. There were many caves in the stony mountain, in which were the remains of the predecessors of Aoyama, who had died before they could reach the heavenly arrival state. As for those swordsmen in the history of Aoyama who had reached the heavenly arrival state but failed to ascend, most of them had turned into the spring rain, the winter snow, or the light specks like Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing. If I die, I won't turn into nothingness, and I'll return everything to this world. Lu Shui continued, "Just leave me here. If any disciple of Aoyama needs me in the future, he can come and have a bite of me. I'll be of some use to him." It was unclear why Jingjiu made such a statement that sounded like his last words. There was nobody in the Hermit Peaks, and it was unclear to whom he intended to say his last words. Chapter 677. The strong wind was howling incessantly. Though the ancient cypress trees in Yamatsai were protected by the formations, there was no need to worry about them falling down. But the willow branches outside the window in the distance had all been uprooted, and many of them had been broken, looking like the water weeds in the torrent. Sitting by the window, Xiaohe watched the scene. Her mind was as turbulent as the lake water, but she didn't dare show it. She bit her lip so hard that the blood could be vaguely seen on her lips. The ruby earring swayed gently under her earlobe, as if it was made of blood. It was extremely beautiful, yet a little strange. The wind and waves in the deep sea were even more dangerous. They would appear and fall down from time to time like a huge blue wall, killing a great many shoals of fish. The booming sounds in the huge whirlpool were even more deafening, sounding like the rumbling thunder, but they couldn't drown out the screams of the dark phoenix in the high sky. Summoned by the screams of the dark phoenix and the feather amulet, more and more demons swam over from all over the ocean, forming countless white lines on the surface of the ocean. The first few demons to arrive had already died by the edge of the whirlpool, exuding a strong smell of blood, which couldn't even be diluted by the seawater pouring down to the bottom of the ocean. This was the deep part of the ocean. Even though the news of the huge waves were here, it would take a long time before it reached Chaotian. The wind and waves were calm by the East Ocean. The wild grass was ruffled by the early spring wind, and the yellow amulet paper slips on the cliff walls quivered slightly, not even making a rustling sound. The chief monk of the instruction hall of the Guoqing Temple and the nun of Shui Yu nunnery sat in the deep grass, their energies exceedingly tranquil, as if they had become one with heaven and earth. Besides the figures in the heavenly arrival state like Master Shui Yu nunnery, the other cultivation practitioners couldn't detect them even if they came to the heavenly well. It was because their energies were identical to the amulet wills in this place. The yellow amulet paper slips were growing fainter along with the recitation. More terrifyingly, the scripts engraved deeply on the cliff walls were growing fainter as well. It seemed that a shapeless and soundless chaotic wind was eroding the cliff walls, wiping out all the traces at a much faster pace than the passage of time. In the depths of the quiet East Sea, the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect sat quietly in the water with his eyes closed. His sparse hair fluttered in the undercurrent, like a school of fish pecking at the seaweed. An extremely gloomy aura emanated from his body, but it didn't go far. It gradually condensed into black smoke and dyed the seawater into an ink-like substance. It looked extremely terrifying. Zen Master is not in Guoqing Temple, but in the Snowland. Master Shui Yu nunnery has gone to Aoyama in a small green curtain sedan. The sect leader ceremony was officially held, and the representatives of all the sects in the world went there. The Guoqing Temple and the Windblade cult had also sent their representatives. The Mirror sect and the Platonist sect, which were close to the Aoyama, had naturally arrived early as well. The Baodong Zen Temple and some other sects that didn't meddle in worldly affairs had also come. Even the Kunlun sect had come. Small sects like the Sandu sect and the Cool Breeze Gang had also come without invitations. The high platform in front of the stone forest on Qingguang Peak was filled with guests. Only important figures like Master Shui Yu nunnery and the Emperor of Ayazawa were qualified to have a seat on the peak. Of course, people like King Yang and Sensei would receive special treatment. However, the best seat on the peak was not reserved for the small green curtain sedan. The divine emperor, Jing Yao, was sitting in the chair. The two ministers, Ming and Jin, as well as Duke Liu and other important figures of the imperial court were sitting quietly beside him. This was the grandest gathering in the cultivation world. Neither the Tao competition at Zhongzhou School nor the grand ceremony of Aoyama, which had ended without any success, could compare with this gathering. The heaven and earth hadn't arrived yet, and the grand ceremony hadn't started yet. Many people would look up at the sky from time to time. It was unclear if they were expecting something or being cautious about something. The clouds in the high sky suddenly became a bit disorderly, giving off a great many flying catkins. Then the catkins parted, revealing the figure of a huge cloud boat. They had arrived at Zhongzhou School. Seeing this scene, some people were relieved, while others became even more nervous, especially when they sensed the two extremely powerful auras. The Immortals Tan and Bai came to visit at the same time. What were they going to do? As the crowd was wondering what was going on, an exceedingly formidable energy suddenly came out from the peaks of Aoyama, moving slowly from the north to the south, as if it would cut the sky open. The cloud boat of Zhongzhou School retreated as quickly as it could, and didn't stop until it was 100 miles away. The sky was not cut open. It was merely a passageway opened by the sword formation of Aoyama. The immortal Tan walked down from the sky and landed on the top of Qingguang Peak, cupping his hands in greeting to Guang Yuanjinren and Nan Wang. Guang Yuanjinren returned the greeting earnestly, but Nan Wang didn't pay any attention to him. In the next moment, a patch of cloud and fog appeared on the top of Qingguang Peak. The figure of a woman could be vaguely seen in the fog, though her face couldn't be seen clearly. All the cultivation swordsmen in the world had arrived, save for the Broadsword King, Chao Yuan, and Zen Master in the Snowland. If these swordsmen of the cultivation circle suddenly launched an attack, it would be an unimaginable force. Yet, the Aoyama sect was not afraid of it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let the immortals tan and buy in. Back in Xiaoga City, many people had witnessed the scene of tens of thousands of swords striking down at the same time. Even if fairy ladies were killed by the sword formation of Aoyama. Who would dare act recklessly in Aoyama? Nobody had thought that the swordsmen of various sects had come to Aoyama, which meant that Chao Tian was quite weak at the moment. The word weak was usually used in defense, but where were the enemies of Chao Tian? Looking at the patch of cloud and fog, Nan Wang sneered. Though he intended to mock her, he didn't know what to say. She was the true immortal of the southern Barbara tribes, but she was not good at talking. It was then that a voice of moderate volume burst out on the peak top. I've been curious about something. Rizhui looked at Guanan Shan and continued with an innocent expression. Didn't the immortal Tan see what she looked like when he married her? Guanan Shan glanced at him innocently, wondering why Rizhui had to tell him every time. Hearing what Rizhui said, some disciples of Aoyama felt uneasy, wondering if Rizhui intended to start a fight on the spot. Yet, the important figures in the cultivation circle, like the headmaster of Ozawa, felt relieved. It was because Bai Zhenren didn't slap Rizhui to death, which indicated the attitude of the Zhongzhou school that day. The Zhongzhou school intended to take advantage of the grand ceremony of the sect master to express their goodwill to Aoyama. To put it more precisely, they came here to ask for peace. The elegant ceremonial music rang out, and the ocean of clouds moved slightly, displaying a solemn energy. Guangyin Zhenren waved his sleeve, and the sword of the returning sun broke through the sky, shining brightly on the top of Tianguang Peak under the sunlight. Nan Wang snapped his fingers, and countless sword strings came out, forming the zither sword under the sunlight, hovering in silence. Then, the elders and disciples of the peaks of Aoyama all summoned their flying swords. For a moment, thousands of flying swords appeared in the blue sky, with different shapes and different sword wills. But when they were gathered together, it was extremely awe-inspiring. Seeing such a scene, the cultivation practitioners of various sects were shocked speechless. Even if Fang Jingtian was disabled, the Aoyama sect still had 3 figures in the heavenly arrival realm and 3 guardians, and more terrifyingly, more than 70 swordsmen in the Broken Sea realm, including several at the peak of the Broken Sea realm. What kind of lineup would they have in 100 years? Footsteps came from behind the cliff wall. Countless people looked in that direction. His white robe was fluttering. Jing Jia walked out. Zhao Liu stood behind his right hand, not holding the cat. Behind him was Gu Qing, holding a sword. Yuan Chu was holding the golden book needed for the grand ceremony of the sect master. Zhua Ruzhui swaggered over while holding himself in his arms. Apiao didn't show up, probably because it wasn't convenient. Ping Yongka was still sleeping on the sword peak. Just like 100 years ago, he missed the grand ceremony perfectly. Many people fixed their eyes on the back of Jing Jiao's left hand. Lu Shui was standing there. Chapter 678. The cultivation practitioners of various sects didn't find the scholar of Yamatai after they came to Aoyama. They had many doubts. Even though Bu Qiuxiao was at the critical moment of becoming a saint, Yamatai and Shinma Peak had been on good terms for more than 100 years, so Yamatai should have sent some disciples here. It wasn't until they saw Lu Shui that their doubts were answered. Everybody was aware of the relationship between Lu Shui and Jing Jiao, and Jing Jiao was an important figure in Yamatai at the moment. As such, this arrangement was quite appropriate. Some of the more sinister ones had more considerations. The most favored disciples of Bu Qiuxiao were Shi Yun and Lu Shui. The future housemaster would be chosen from either of them. It was said that Yamatai had been divided into 2 groups because of this matter. Shi Yun and Lu Shui didn't seem to care about the matter, and they were still close and respectful to each other. But who knew what was going on in secret? Bu Qiuxiao couldn't do anything about it now. If Shi Yun had sent Lu Shui to attend the ceremony of Aoyama, was he trying to express his intention by doing so? No matter what was on their minds, the ceremony of Aoyama had to go on. The leader of Ozawa, as the representative of the cultivation circle, delivered a speech. But nobody thought it was flattering. It was because the target of the speech was Jing Jiao. The speech, which looked like a history book, danced around Tianguang Peak like the flowers, stirring up the threads in the ocean of clouds. Looking at the man in white clothing on the peak top, the people had a complicated feeling, including admiration and awe, but mostly bewilderment. Even though this man in white lived another life, he was still the most outstanding figure in Chaotian, and he was still the immortal Jingyang. Of course, he had changed a little. The immortal Jingyang didn't care about the affairs of the world back then. He lived in seclusion on Shinma Peak all year round, and didn't leave any disciples behind. In this life, Jing Jiao was still very lazy, but he did a lot of things and took in a lot of disciples. Zhao Liu was a powerful swordsman in the peak of the Broken Sea state. Judging from the energy of Lu Shui, he was not weaker than her. Zhuo Ruzhui was not his disciple, but he was deeply influenced by him. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu were already important figures in Aoyama, and even the imperial court. Ping Yongka was already the master of Yinqing Peak. In addition, there was Cain Yang from the Mirror sect and the queen of the underworld whom everyone knew but dared not mention. Not to mention the Guoqing Temple and Shuai Nunnery's foreign aid. Under the gazes of the people with mixed emotions, the Ozawa order finished reading the eulogy. More than 10 eminent monks from the Guoqing Temple stepped forward and used the dew from the stone pagoda as a net for Jing Jiao. Then, the representatives of the various sects presented their gifts. The divine Emperor Jing Yao presented the gifts in person. Yuan Chu was the chief supervisor of the inauguration of the sect leader. He knew Jing Jiao's temperament well, so he simplified the process as much as possible. He canceled all the singing and sword performance in the sect rules, but the process still lasted for a long time. By then, the sun was in the middle of the sky. Separated by the great formation of Aoyama, it did not feel hot, but only splendid. Guang Yinzhenren walked to the front of the stone tablet and read the edict left by the immortal Lu Xi again. Then it was the last part. Jing Jiao only needed to take out the inherited heaven sword and accept the worship of the elders and disciples of the 9 peaks of Aoyama. Then he would officially become the immortal sect leader of Aoyama. Lifting the sword was a simple action. Even a 3-year-old mortal could do it. But the atmosphere on the top of Tianguang Peak became solemn. Over 100 years ago, Jing Jiao was forced to leave Aoyama because he was unwilling to take out the inherited heaven sword. What about today? At that time, Jing Jiao was in the Broken Sea state. If he took out the inherited heaven sword, it might be snatched away. Taiping Jinren wanted to subdue him with the inherited heaven sword, so he had to play it safe. Now he was a figure in the heavenly arrival state. After defeating Fang Jingtian, many people thought he was already in the upper level of the heavenly arrival state. He would soon be on an equal footing with the Broadsword King and the Immortal Tan and the Immortal Bai. And with the help of the sword formation of Aoyama, he had nothing to worry about. Jing Jiao paid no attention to the gazes on him. He walked to the front of the hut, turned around, and sat on a chair. The chair did not move an inch. Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, and the others stood behind the chair. I repaired this chair myself. What do you think? Is it sturdy? Zhuo Ruzhui said proudly, standing side by side with Gu Qing. Gu Qing looked at him and said with a smile, I heard that it was you who broke the chair in the first place. Nobody heard their conversation because everybody's attention was focused on Jing Jiao. This chair was the seat of the sect master of Aoyama. Sitting on this chair was a very symbolic and important action. Yet, Jing Jiao did it so casually. It was like sitting on the bamboo chair as usual. It was like sitting on the sword of the universe. It was like lying in the horse-drawn carriage of the Gu clan. It was like bickering with Lu Xi. It was like staring at Yuan Qijing. It was like holding Lien Sanyue's hand. Jing Jiao remained silent while looking at the horizon. It was quiet on the top of Tianguang Peak. Nobody spoke a word. An icicle fell down from the manor cave on the distant Shanghai Peak and broke into pieces on the ground. The sound was not loud, startling many people. Jing Jiao pulled back his gaze and took out an object backhandedly. The sunlight shone on his right hand. The inherited heaven sword was indeed not a sword. It was a sheath. The ancient patterns were engraved on the sheath. The mouth of the silent and dark scabbard faintly exuded an extremely faint but extremely profound sword essence. Jingzhou's hand holding the sheath of the inherited heaven sword was steady, not trembling at all. Everybody was aware that he would never let go of it, no matter whether it was the sheath of the inherited heaven sword or this Aoyama. Guang Yuanzhiren bowed down to the ground slowly. Nen Wang bowed down to the ground. Zhao Liu bowed down to the ground. Qin Yutian bowed down to the ground. Gu Qing bowed down to the ground. All the disciples of Aoyama bowed down to the ground. The ripples of the sword wheels could be vaguely felt on the distant sword peak. The clouds and fog had gradually dispersed. It seemed that the magnificent scene of tens of thousands of swords greeting each other would occur soon. The green curtain moved slightly. Shuiyu Nunnery sat inside, bowing slightly. A dozen highly achieved monks of the Guoqing Temple chanted the name of Buddha and bowed with pressed palms. The cultivation practitioners of various sects either knelt down on the ground or bowed to the ground. Even the immortal Tan and Bai Zhenren in the fog bowed slightly. All of them bowed to Jingzhou. It was a sign of respect for the Aoyama sect. It was a sign of respect for the immortal Jingyang. And it was a sign of respect for the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian for the Tao. However, one person on the top of Tianguang Peak didn't move. He was the least likely person to do so. All the cultivation practitioners knew that he was brought to Aoyama by Jingzhou from that small village, and he was willing to die for Jingzhou. Why did he stand there in silence at such an important moment? Zhao Liu lifted her head to look at that person, the expression in her eyes changing slightly. Guang Yuanzhiren and Nan Wang looked at that person, their eyes full of incredulity. Countless gazes fell on that person, showing bafflement, shock, and bewilderment. The person who didn't move was none other than Lu Shui. As Jingzhou raised the sheath of the inherited heaven sword, he curled up the corners of his mouth, flashing an inexplicable smile. He stood by the chair in silence, not moving an inch. When all the gazes fell on him, he brushed off his cloth and took a step forward. "Let me do it," he said to Jingzhou. Chapter 679. More than 100 years ago, a spring rain fell in Chaotian. The inherited heaven sword returned to Aoyama and was inserted into the stone monument, bringing back the will of Lu Xi. As the important figures of the Aoyama sect were arguing, a gust of wind suddenly blew over the peak top, ruffling a white cloth. Under countless gazes, Jingzhou walked to the front of the stone monument and stood on the shell of the round turtle. He took down the sheath of the inherited heaven sword and walked to the chair, turning around and sitting down. "Let me do it," he said to the others. More than 100 years later, on the top of Tianguang Peak in the same place, someone came to the front of the chair and said something similar, "Let me do it." That person was Lu Shui. It was deathly quiet on the top of Tianguang Peak. The people were shocked, speechless. Guang Yuanzhiren and Nan Wang turned pale, because they had vaguely guessed a possibility. Oh, that's why. Looking at the inherited heaven sword in his hand, Jingzhou suddenly asked, "How many years have you known me?" This was a simple question, but Lu Shui was taken aback. 149 years? He asked uncertainly. The gust of wind blew over the hut again. Jingzhou lifted his head and looked at Jingzhou in silence, saying nothing. The expression in Lu Shui's eyes changed slightly, becoming much colder. "It's indeed 149 years since Cloudy Town," he said. "You know, that's not what I'm asking about," said Jingzhou. A struggling expression showed in Lu Shui's eyes as he said, "It's 149 years." In the next moment, he suddenly took out a fan and fanned himself in the gentle wind on the top of Tianguang Peak, as if it were extremely hot. "It's 149 years. It's true, but it's about leaving Aoyama." "No." The quarrels broke out along with the fanning. People looked at the scene in the hut, stunned and speechless. No one was arguing with Lu Shui. He was arguing with himself, and the most puzzling thing was, weren't they all talking about 149 years? Suddenly, all the sounds of arguing disappeared. Lu Shui looked at Jingjiu and asked, "There are 50 great Taoists, 49 heavenly evolutions, and man escapes?" Jingjiu said, "Yes, 149 years ago, you left the sword jail, and I met him." The look in Lu Shui's eyes became somewhat strange. "I don't believe you can calculate everything." Jingjiu said, "I didn't predict it, but it just happened. Back then, he failed to ascend. At the same time, that person left the sword prison. He crossed the underground river and went to the small village. There, he saw a 10-year-old child. That man was tied up by Zhao Liu's sword rope in a restaurant in Cloudy Town and escaped by faking his death. This was the beginning of the story. It had been exactly 149 years since then. There are 50 great Taoists, 49 heavenly evolutions, and man escapes." Jingjiu looked at him and said calmly, "With the great Taoist before you, what you're doing is very boring." Staring into his eyes, Lu Shui said, "I'm just taking back what belongs to me. How is it boring?" Jingjiu looked back at him in silence and said, "It's mine." Lu Shui asked, "If it's really yours, why haven't you taken it back yet?" Jingjiu was holding the inherited heaven sword in his right hand. He should be able to take it back at any time, but the situation was a bit weird. The sheath of the inherited heaven sword quivered slightly, giving off a buzzing sound. The sunlight falling on it was shattered into snowflakes, as if the sheath didn't know where to go. The sword came out of Aoyama, and the people here knew best what a sword was. It wasn't that the sword was yours when you held it in your hand. The control over the sword had never been like this. The ownership of the sword had never been calculated in this way. Jingjiu looked at him and said earnestly, "This sword was given to me by Lu Xi. Lu Xi gave the inherited heaven sword to you, but it doesn't mean it's yours." Lu Shui continued expressionlessly, "It's because I didn't give it to him back then. So this sword is still mine." Guang Yuanjinren and Nan Wang looked at Lu Shui with a weird expression on their faces. "Master?" they asked uncertainly. Lu Shui smiled. His face was still dark. His expression was still as sincere as ever. But when he smiled, he seemed to have turned into another person. Taiping Jinren. The silence on the peak top was broken. People were so shocked that they cried out. "Taiping Jinren. He's the demon Taiping." It was true that the immortal Taiping was the only one who could say this. He didn't pass the inherited heaven sword to Lu Xi, but Jingyang, Lu Xi, and Yuan Qijing locked him up in the sword jail. There was no trial, no inheritance, just a sneak attack. From the perspective of the orthodoxy of Aoyama, the inherited heaven sword was still his. A blood-red sword light illuminated the top of Tianguang Peak. Yet, nobody understood why the person who was supposed to be Lu Shui had turned into the immortal Taiping. Was this the rumored possession or the control of the spiritual soul? Zhao Liu didn't think about it. She stood up. The thoughtless sword was aimed at the center of Taiping Jinren's eyebrows, along with her line of sight. Many years ago, in a restaurant in Cloudy Town, she tied him up with a thoughtless sword. Then a flying sword came from the window and pierced through his eyebrows. She didn't know how high his cultivation state was after his total transformation. She didn't even know how to kill him. She could only prepare according to her experience. The sword of the universe appeared on the peak, ready to fall down at any time. The crooked, gray sword was hiding behind the sword of the universe. Zhuo Rizhui stood behind Yuan Chu. He reached out his right hand and aimed at the back of Taiping Jinren, his face full of excitement. The disciples of Shenma Peak started to prepare for the fight without any hesitation. The rest of the disciples of Aoyama were in a state of shock and confusion. At this moment, a few elders of Aoyama rushed out from the crowd. They knelt down and saluted to Taiping Jinren. They shouted in surprise, "Sect leader, you're back." Elder Mo Chi was excited. He was about to go out and salute. Suddenly, he recalled what had happened in the past hundreds of years. He stopped slowly and let out a painful sigh. Following that, more and more shouts rang out. Some were shouting sect leader, some were shouting master, some were shouting grandmaster. No matter how many years Taiping Jinren had been locked in the sword jail, no matter how many people in the cultivation world said he was a wicked devil, he was still the master, the grandmaster, and the sect leader for some people in Oima's sect. But why did the grandmaster come back? Was he going to fight for the position of sect leader? Who should we support? At this moment, Jing Jiao did something that no one expected. He loosened his right hand that was holding the scabbard of the inherited heaven sword. Loosening the scabbard didn't mean he was letting it go. He couldn't put the scabbard back because it was under the control of Taiping Jinren. At this moment, it didn't matter if he was holding the scabbard or not. The scabbard didn't fall to the ground. It hovered between him and Taiping Jinren in silence, vibrating slightly and buzzing like a wild bee. Jing Jiao stood up and walked to the edge of the cliff. The scabbard of the inherited heaven sword moved with him. Taiping Jinren also walked to the edge of the cliff. They were several feet away from each other, and they didn't look at each other. The scabbard of the inherited heaven sword was still between them. Guangyun Jinren and Nan Wang looked at each other, knowing that their master and uncle should have similar control over the scabbard of the inherited heaven sword. Zhao Liu could see more things. She knew that Jing Jiao didn't want them to get involved because their states were too low or because of some other reason. For example, if they attacked now, they might not be able to kill Taiping Jinren, but they might hurt Lu Shui, who was possessed by him. She was the one who understood Jing Jiao the most, as well as the relationship between him and Lu Shui. Taiping Jinren obviously knew this as well, which was why he took the risk to go to the 1,000 Miles Wind Corridor and paid a great price to create this situation. How could Jing Jiao solve this situation? He looked up at a place in the sea of clouds. There was a small sedan with green curtains there. The green curtains were tousled by the gentle wind, and the figure of Shui Yu Nunnery could be vaguely seen. Shui Yu Nunnery understood Jing Jiao's intention without the need for him to speak. The green curtains moved again. A pink peach blossom bloomed in the space between the curtains. Shui Yu Nunnery arrived by stepping on the clouds. It wasn't until now that many cultivation practitioners knew what Shui Yu Nunnery looked like. She looked like an ordinary young woman, wearing a plain skirt. Her eyes were exceedingly bright, resembling Lien Sanhua to some extent. Though she looked ordinary, she was in fact one of the most powerful swordsmen in Chaotian. A dozen holes suddenly appeared in the sea of clouds, which were the footprints left by her. In the blink of an eye, she had arrived on the top of Tianguang Peak. With an unimaginably powerful energy, she flipped her palm and slapped toward Taiping Jinren's chest. At the moment, Jing Jiao and Taiping Jinren were fighting for the inherited heaven sword on the top of Tianguang Peak. The only people who could stop her were Guangyun Jinren and Nan Wang. Guangyun Jinren and Nan Wang eyed each other, but didn't move. Shui Yu Nunnery's palm landed on Taiping Jinren's chest. The palm seemed to be able to destroy the mountains and overturn the seas, but it was as gentle as a gust of gentle wind when it landed. It was because her intention was not to kill Lu Shui, but to force Taiping Jinren out of Lu Shui's body. Jing Jiao didn't ask Zhao Liu and the others to do the deed. He came to the edge of the cliff and glanced at the small green curtained sedan. This was his intention. Lien Sanhua could force the fairy lady Bai Ren out of Bai Zhao's body back in Zhaoga City. It was natural that Shui Yu Nunnery could do the same. No matter how powerful Taiping's spiritual soul was, it was impossible for it to be more powerful than Bai Ren's. Yet, something unexpected happened. Taiping Jinren's body swayed a little, and a trickle of blood came out from the corners of his mouth, but nothing else happened. A rainbow illuminated the top of Tianguang Peak. Shui Yu Nunnery grunted softly and returned to the small green curtained sedan after turning into a green light. He was wounded a little bit. The surprise screams broke out around Tianguang Peak. The crowd looked at Taiping Jinren with a fearful expression in their eyes. They didn't know what the intention of Shui Yu Nunnery's palm strike was, but they saw him contend with Jing Jiao for the inherited heaven sword, and he was able to resist Shui Yu Nunnery's palm strike head-on, exchanging a wound for a wound. They all thought that this was a formidable cultivation state. Taiping Jinren put away the city guard pen and said nonchalantly to Jing Jiao, I told you many years ago that one can't step into the same river. You have used the same method in Jiaoga City. Do you want to use it on me again? Chapter 680. The palm strike of Shui Yu nunnery proved that her and Jing Jiao's conjecture was wrong. Taiping Jinren didn't possess Lu Shisui's body. If Lu Shisui didn't possess Lu Shisui's body, why did he become Taiping Jinren? An old and trembling voice broke out in the sky outside the cliff. The two-mind connection. The speaker was a highly achieved monk of the Guoqing Temple. Meanwhile, Jing Jiao had also thought of something. Taiping Jinren succeeded in total transformation and became a spiritual being. His two-mind connection grew stronger, but this kind of control could only take effect within a certain distance. Where was he hiding on Lu Shisui's body at the moment? Yamatai's ability is indeed a bit strange. That lad didn't see through me, but he was somehow alarmed. He asked me to come to Aoyama to ask for your help, but he didn't know that this was also part of my plan. What the immortal Taiping referred to was the meaningful conversation he had with Shi Yun. Unfortunately, Shi Yun thought that the immortal Taiping had done something to Lu Shisui, but he didn't know that the immortal Taiping had Lu Shisui under his control. As for Xiao He, she was also affected by his spiritual soul. She felt fearful and bewildered subconsciously, but she didn't know the source of those emotions. Jing Jiao said, Shisui has a high talent and a strong will. He has cultivated the righteous energy for more than 100 years, so he won't be controlled by your two-mind connection. Taiping Jinren retorted, You have calculated everything, but didn't you predict that the devil pill had something wrong with it? Jing Jiao said expressionlessly, No matter where you are, you have no way to escape as long as you kill him. Taiping Jinren let out a mocking smile, saying, You didn't even want to kill by Zhao in Jiaoga City, let alone this little guy. Having said that, he wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. Smelling the scent drifting in the wind, Jing Jiao exclaimed, The heavenly pill? The seven-leaf lotus? Taiping Jinren said with a smile, You are indeed the one who understands me the best. Jing Jiao said, I've read the notes you left behind. Hearing this conversation, the immortal Guangyuan and two experienced elders of Shuriwa Peak had their expressions changed abruptly, let alone the others. Taiping Jinren said, I don't care about the life or death of this body, so you don't have to tell me about the harm caused by the sky-mending pill and the seven-leaf lotus. As expected, Jing Jiao stopped talking. He suddenly flipped his right hand and pointed it at the sky. The inherited heaven's sword, which had been shaking non-stop, suddenly stopped and became unusually bright. The faint sword will at the mouth of the scabbard floated up and shot out like raindrops, piercing through the great array of Aoyama and leaving a dozen holes in the high sky. The positions of those holes were extremely high, reaching the emptiness realm. There was a faint blue and crimson color in the holes. It could be the thunderstorms in the Thunder Dominion. Taiping Jinren flexed his fingers. The inherited heaven's sword started shaking again, more violently than before, as if it was struggling. The sword will leaking out from the mouth of the scabbard was like the willow branches in the 1,000-mile wind corridor, drifting in disarray, unable to hold on any longer. The great array of Aoyama was shut down soundlessly, and the strange phenomenon in the Thunder Dominion in the high sky disappeared. All of a sudden, the sword bracelet on his wrist turned into a sharp small sword with a crisp sound, thrusting toward the center of Taiping Jinren's brows. From Yamatai to the top of Tianguang Peak, the lone sword had been silent the entire time, as if it had surrendered. It wasn't until now that it had awakened a trace of spiritual awareness in Lu Shisui and launched a sneak attack. Besides the all-in-one, the lone sword was the most powerful and sharpest fairy sword in Aoyama. It was unimaginably powerful when it struck with all its might. However, with a buzzing sound, the lone sword halted in front of Taiping Jinren's eyes, unable to move an inch forward. A trace of coldness appeared in Taiping Jinren's eyes. He pinched the lone sword with 2 fingers and flicked it angrily. The lone sword turned into a beam of sword light and flew toward the sword peak in the distance. With a crack, it drilled deep into the cliff, and no one knew when it would come out again. The fog on Yunqing Peak had dissipated a lot. Many flying swords poked their heads out of the cliff, and some even flew into the sky. They were summoned by the scabbard of the inherited heaven sword, and were ready to pay homage to the new leader of Aoyama. No one had expected such a drastic change. These flying swords had no spiritual awareness, and could only act according to their sword will. All of a sudden, a tiny hole appeared in the cliff at the top of the peak. It was left by the lone sword. The flying swords on the peak seemed to be shaken, and they all flew up. The cliff rocks rustled and fell, stirring up a lot of smoke and dust. A gray flying sword broke through the sky, heading toward Tianguang Peak. Clang! Clang! A pale green flying sword flew over and knocked it to the ground. Soon after, more and more flying swords began to attack each other. It was obvious that some of the flying swords were ready to attack Tianguang Peak, while others were trying to stop them. The sky was filled with the shadows of flying swords, and the sounds of flying swords clashing and chasing each other could be heard everywhere. Countless sword wills scattered in all directions. The iron eagles had long flown far away in fear, while the remaining clouds and fog among the cliffs were cut into pieces and disappeared without a trace. On the cliff at the top of the sword peak, Ping Yongka was still sleeping in the cave. He was the most sensitive to sword wills. Now that the sword wills in the peak were in a mess, his breath was also disturbed. His face turned extremely pale, and blood trickled down from his ears. The chaotic battle of flying swords gradually came to a stop, and then divided into 2 sides. They looked like a still rainstorm in the sky, confronting each other. It was a very mystical scene. Several cold but extremely pure sword wills floated out of the scabbard of the inherited heaven sword, heading toward the peaks of Aoyama. Heaven and earth sensed the sword wills wherever they went. The people on Tianguang Peak sensed the unusual movement on the sword peak, but they could not see the specific scene. Guang Yuanjinren and Nan Wang looked extremely solemn, knowing that the fight between their master and uncle for the inherited heaven sword had reached the most critical moment. It was not until then that they finally confirmed that the pivot of the Aoyama sword formation was the inherited heaven sword. No wonder the rules of Aoyama clearly stated that only those with the inherited heaven sword were qualified to be the leader of Aoyama. Then what was the all-in-one? Could it be the source of the Aoyama sword formation? How did Yuan Qijing control the Aoyama sword formation when the inherited heaven sword was not around? The ocean of clouds in front of the cliff of Tianguang Peak rippled violently, and the color of the clouds darkened. In an instant, countless water droplets condensed and shot out. A rainstorm rushed toward Jingjiu and Taipingzhenren at the edge of the cliff. No! Guang Yuanjinren looked at a certain spot on the peak and shouted. There, Ozawa Ling was wielding a large banner with a solemn expression. The banner seemed to contain endless thunder and lightning, as well as rainwater that poured down like the sea. This was the legendary wind and rain banner of 8 directions. Ozawa Ling had gathered the natural force of heaven and earth, intending to give Taipingzhenren a fatal blow. Previously, like the cultivators of other sects, he thought that Aoyama could handle Taipingzhenren by itself. He did not expect that Taipingzhenren would become so powerful after returning to Aoyama. It was evident that Shuiyu Nunnery and Jingjiu had a tacit understanding to launch that attack. As such, Jing Jiuling had to do something about it. There was a sizzling sound. The rainstorm suddenly disappeared, and the ocean of clouds was as tranquil as a carpet. Ozawa Ling spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, his face extremely pale. Looking at the wind and rain banner of 8 directions in his hand, he exclaimed in an incredulous and trembling voice, "What is going on?" The immortal Tan helped him up and transferred a wisp of spiritual energy into his body, sighing, "This is the sword formation of Aoyama." Innumerable sword wills appeared by the edge of the cliff. They would be sliced into pieces when the wind blew over. The sword wills would glitter when the sunlight shone on them. These sword wills encircled Jingjiao and Taiping Jinren. More precisely, they encircled the two of them with the sheath of the inherited heaven sword as the center. In the eyes of the onlookers, they were glowing, emitting countless sword lights. Guan Yuan Jinren intended to stop Ozawa Ling earlier, not because he cared about Taiping Jinren, but because he was worried that Jingjiao would be wounded. Fighting for the inherited heaven sword was the same as fighting for the ownership of the sword peak and the sword formation of Aoyama. The sword formation of Aoyama originated from the all-in-one. It also meant the control of the all-in-one sword. The swords had risen up, and the sword formation of Aoyama had fallen down, enshrouding Jingjiao and Taiping Jinren. It was unclear who would be pierced through by tens of thousands of swords in the end. During this process, the two of them were protected by the sword formation of Aoyama and isolated from the real world. Neither the wind and rain banner of Ozawa nor the magic treasures like the scenic cloud bell could pass through it. Shueyu Nunnery couldn't do anything about it at the moment. All they could do was wait and see which of the two brothers at the edge of the cliff would be the winner. The sword wills increased in number, sharper and more awe-inspiring. The sword lights grew brighter and brighter. Countless cracks appeared on the cliff walls, and the ocean of clouds sank down slowly. The onlookers on the peak couldn't take it anymore. Numerous tears appeared on the clothes of Zhao Leiyu and the others standing nearby, and some black hair fell down. The chi of heaven and earth became even more chaotic. The great formation of Aoyama showed its true form. A vast and boundless green light covered the peaks. Rays of light kept flowing on the surface of the light, and some cracks appeared. A patch of dark clouds suddenly appeared on the top of Bihu Peak in the distance. Thunder and lightning struck down, illuminating the blue lake. Thousands of piles of snow had formed on the lake, looking extremely frightening. A snowstorm suddenly fell on the top of Shanda Peak. A few feet of snow had accumulated on the ground in a dozen seconds. Some pine trees couldn't bear the weight of the snow and broke one after another. Lightning also appeared in the blue sky. The sword wills on Yunqing Peak became even more awe-inspiring and chaotic, and the cliffs kept collapsing. Chapter 681. Get out of my way. Nen Wang yelled sternly. Guan Yinjinren waved his sleeve, emitting a few sword lights, forcing Zhao Leiyu and the others to retreat to the back. The flying swords flew up in disorder, and the magic treasures illuminated the top of the peak where the strong wind was howling. The disciples of Aoyama and the representatives of various sects had retreated in tandem. Master, Senior Master, if you keep fighting like this, the great formation of Aoyama will collapse. Guan Yizhenren held his right hand in front of him, blocking the whistling wind and the dreadful sword wills with his fiery sword wills as he yelled at the two people by the cliff's edge. I don't care. A cold and aloof smile appeared on Lu Shisui's dark face, as if he didn't care about life and death. It looked a bit odd. What about you? You don't care either, do you? Who else do you care about besides yourself? Do you regret that you shouldn't have killed this little guy in the beginning? What about you? Jing Jiao asked. Do you feel good fighting against the whole world? Taiping Jinren said with a laugh. It's not fighting but destroying. It's indeed a wonderful feeling to destroy an old world. The dreadful whistling could be heard in the deep part of the ocean. There was a wreckage of a godly boat of Penglai Island on the surface of the ocean. The crew members were struggling in the rising and falling waves while holding the wooden planks in their hands. Hearing the whistling in the distance, their hearts were full of despair. It was the whistling of the huge whirlpool. The sound of the spring in the so-called secret realm of Singing Spring was not as dreadful as it used to be. Why were there other sounds among howls today? It was as if they were real lives, full of pain, but also a sense of relief. The crew members were swallowed by the huge waves and fell into the bottomless abyss before they could come up with such a thought. The godly boat of Penglai Island was unlucky enough to become a part of the blood sacrifice of Taiping Jinren. Those demons, summoned by the Dark Phoenix from all over the world, had known their fate from the very beginning. Some demon beasts with higher spiritual awareness had tried to struggle for survival, but they couldn't resist the imprints that the underworld had branded in their souls. Therefore, they could only watch helplessly as they were sucked into the huge whirlpool. The huge dace devils, the swallowing boat monsters, and the strange demons that the humans in Chaotian had never seen before showed themselves in the ocean, roaring as they dashed to the sky outside the cliff. But they couldn't fall into the deep part of the whirlpool. They began to disintegrate on the way down, spitting out fresh blood and turning into puffs of bloody mist in the end. The demon beasts' howls of pain and despair even drowned out the sound of the huge whirlpool. The bloody mist was not washed away by the violent seawater. It gradually condensed in the air. Countless droplets of blood connected and drew complicated patterns in the sky above the great maelstrom. Then, they formed a complicated, three-dimensional diagram. If Ko Chin Tong were still alive, he would be able to recognize that this was the heavenly slaying formation that the Bloody Demon Church had tried to deploy for many years, but couldn't because of the insufficient number of blood sacrifices. On the other side of the distant ocean, the giant who had just woken up heard those sounds again, a worried expression showing in his eyes. He picked up a wooden stick and walked toward the ocean, ignoring the curses of the spirits who had been woken up. The giant was very tall, as if his head could reach the sky. He could cover a few miles with one stride, but his body was too heavy and his pace was too slow. It was unclear how long it would take for him to reach the huge whirlpool. Seeing the huge figure disappearing into the ocean, the spirits stopped cursing and put down the long spears and bows in their hands, at a loss for what to do next. All of a sudden, an old female spirit flew out from the deep end of the forest and screamed something in a hurried tone that sounded like a curse. The spirits showed a terrified expression on their faces as they flew toward the other side of the mountain. The heavenly slaying formation couldn't kill all the people in the world. It was because even the evil, bloody demon church hadn't thought of doing such a thing. According to Tai Pingzhen's plan, the purpose of this formation was to shake the power of heaven and earth in the huge whirlpool and change the natural passage created by heaven and earth, changing the direction of the endless seawater flowing toward the abyss and coming out from another huge whirlpool in the northernmost part of the Great Maelstrom. He intended to lead the seawater to the underworld. There was no sun in the underworld, so it was dark and monotonous. The underworld river, which was flowing slowly and exuding light and heat, was the most conspicuous existence in the underworld. The war here had come to an end. The army of the underworld loyal to the Grand Priest was besieged by the army of the underworld capital on both sides of the underworld river. Though they had no way out, they had displayed an unimaginable fighting prowess. If the underworld capital intended to attack the underworld river forcefully and wipe out more than 100,000 loyal subordinates of the Grand Priest, they would have to pay a hefty price. There was a stone platform on a high mountain. The underworld master stood by the cliff's edge, looking at the distant underworld river in silence. The blue cloth he wore was as eye-catching as the underworld river. Of course, fewer soldiers will die if we continue to besiege the underworld river, but it will consume a great deal of energy. More importantly, the situation in the underworld capital will be unstable. Ahem. Tong Yin covered her mouth with her fist and continued after coughing twice. I still think we should attack the underworld capital by force. You have to find a suitable reason to convince me. The underworld master said with a faint smile, I didn't want to explain it to you a few days ago because I didn't know if the scene I had imagined would happen. The reason I invited you here today is to ask you to be my witness. Tong Yin suddenly sensed something unusual. She followed the line of sight of the underworld master and saw a crack suddenly appeared in the dark sky. Boom, 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 boom. It seemed that the underworld had never heard the thunder before. What came down from the sky was not the thunder and lightning, but a great amount of seawater. The blue seawater looked like a huge blue light pillar under the gloomy glow, descending violently from the sky and heading toward the ground. Seeing this, Tong Yan's face turned pale, and she exclaimed in a hoarse voice, "What is going on?" The people in the underworld had never seen the ocean before. They had only heard about it in the legends of the human world, so they couldn't associate the things falling down from the sky with the seawater. Yet the Grand Priest had seen the seawater before. "Has the sky been broken?" he murmured, showing a frightened and bewildered expression on his semi-transparent face. Boom! The seawater, descending from the sky, landed on the ground of the underworld with an unimaginable force, destroying a hill instantly. Hundreds of subordinates of the Grand Priest stationed nearby were smashed into minced meat. The ground was quaking incessantly, and the underworld river was swaying restlessly. The army of the Grand Priest fled in all directions in terror, but they couldn't outrun the surging seawater. What brought the army of the Grand Priest to catastrophe was not the seawater surging over their heads, but the collision between the seawater and the underworld river. Along with countless sizzling sounds, the seawater gushed into the underworld river and was instantly set ablaze, turning into an unimaginable ocean of fire. Those soldiers of the underworld who had luckily escaped the impact of the seawater had all died in this ocean of fire. "What the hell is going on?" asked Tong Yin, while staring into the eyes of the underworld master. Many days ago, the army of the underworld capital didn't carry out his strategy. Even though they had to pay a higher price, they still advanced slowly according to the plan of the underworld master. They drove the last subordinates of the Grand Priest into this patch of valley, but they had also gotten themselves into a great deal of trouble. It was difficult for them to attack, but they couldn't retreat. It seemed that the underworld master had foreseen what would happen that day. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stationed his army in the middle of a high and inconvenient mountain. "Isn't it spectacular?" the underworld master asked excitedly in a trembling voice while pointing to the jade-like seawater in the high night sky. The passageway there grew larger after being washed by the seawater, and the amount of seawater falling down increased. The flames in the underworld river didn't die out. Instead, more green smoke came out, and the broken pieces of the soul fires could be vaguely seen in the smoke. "Spectacular? Do you know what it means?" Tong Yin continued while staring at him. "If the seawater keeps falling down, the poisonous smoke will enshroud the whole underworld. What should we do then?" "The smoke is very light," said the underworld master with a faint smile. Looking at the green smoke above the underworld river, the soldiers of the underworld who died while covering their mouths with their hands in the direction where the green smoke was coming from, Tong Yin had finally understood something. "It turns out this is the method of Taiping Jinren," he murmured. The underworld master remarked sentimentally, "The human world has changed as soon as the green smoke rises. Beside my teacher, who else can achieve this feat?" After a moment of silence, Tong Yin said, Even though the humans in Chaotian will suffer great casualties, many inhabitants of the underworld will be killed by the poisonous smoke." The underworld master said with narrowed eyes, "You're wrong. This isn't a war between the underworld and the upper world. It's a harvest by the cultivation practitioners on those mortals who have wasted their resources in Yuanqi. The mortals, no matter whether they are humans or inhabitants of the underworld, will all be mortals. Killing all the mortals and building a world with only cultivation practitioners was the ambition of Taiping Jinren, and it was also the reason why he was regarded as a devil by the whole world. "I thought a smart person like you wouldn't be so crazy after a few hundred years," said Tong Yin, while staring into the eyes of the underworld master. The underworld master said with a faint smile, "You've forgotten one thing. I'm the personal disciple of the immortal." Tong Yin's face grew paler. It was because the underworld didn't have the energy of heaven and earth. And it was also because he felt so terrified for the first time in his life. Chapter 682. Along with the thunderous booms, a great amount of blue seawater poured down from a high place. As the seawater landed on the ground of the underworld, it created a tremendous impact, which was no different from the rocks falling from the sky. It destroyed the hills by the shore instantly and then gushed into the underworld river. Looking at the green smoke drifting in all directions and in the sky, Tong Yin asked expressionlessly, "What are you going to tell the Emperor when he comes back?" "My idea is different from the Emperor's. It's true that we don't need sunlight and rain, but I don't want to be trampled on by your human race all the time." The underworld master came to Jing Jiu's side and looked at the chaotic and dreadful world at the bottom of the cliff, saying, "The world is on the verge of an unprecedented change. Be prepared to embrace it. Otherwise, everybody will be swallowed by this torrent." "It's the destruction of the world," Tong Yin said while turning to look at his eyes. "Are you sure you can do it?" The underworld master said, "Most of the swordsmen of the human cultivation circle will attend the ceremony of Aoyama today. It's the best opportunity for us to break through those passages." "Then what?" pressed Tong Yin. "Then, as you can see, a great amount of seawater will fall into the underworld from the whirlpool, like a rainstorm that you humans can't even imagine." The underworld master displayed a determined expression on his face. "Look," he said while pointing to a spot in the sky, "a strong wind will follow." At the highest point of the dark world, at a certain spot in the abyss, the space had suddenly become distorted. It was the rapid airflow, and it was the wind blowing over the surface of Chaotian. The wind was whistling incessantly in the 1,000-mile wind corridor. The willow trees by the lake were half above the surface of the water. It was a beautiful scene. Xiaoyi sat by the window, her face pale, which made the earring on her earlobe look even redder. The wind suddenly grew stronger. A few strands of it came in through the formations around the courtyard, making the window quiver slightly, tousling the black hair in front of her forehead and the earring. The earring swayed slowly and turned into a red feather the size of a finger soundlessly, drifting out of the window along with the wind. Xiaoyi had no idea what had happened. Looking at the turbulent waves on the surface of the lake, she felt even more bewildered. The delicate red feather floated out of the window, over the stone path between the cottages, over the pond, over the white goose on the pond, and into the depths of the forest. This was the most heavily guarded school in Yamatai. Bu Qiuxiao's closed-door training place was only a few hundred feet away. The garden, streams, and flowering trees around the study were all formations that Yamatai was best at, but none of them could stop the red feather. Shi Yun suddenly opened his eyes. His face revealed an angry expression. He knew that things were not good, so he dashed away. Unfortunately, the realm of that red feather was too high. By the time he sensed it, it was already too late. There was an ordinary-looking study in the depths of the courtyard. Bu Qiuxiao was sitting on the floor with his eyes closed, with a book open in front of him. His clothes were fluttering even though there was no wind. His breathing was calm and long. Dozens of days ago, he had entered a true state of emptiness. His spirit traveled between heaven and earth and comprehended the supreme profundities. Before the final moment of becoming a saint arrived, he would remain in this state and would not be aware of any movements outside his body. A leaf fell into the pond of the study, creating countless beautiful ripples. The red feather drifted into the study noiselessly under the cover of the ripples. It arrived in front of Bu Qiuxiao along with the wind and drifted over slowly. He was on the verge of becoming a saint, and his body was as strong as a magic treasure. However, it was cut open by the seemingly soft feather. A tiny crack appeared on Bu Qiuxiao's finger without making any sound. It was the index finger of his right hand, which was used to hold the writing brush at the highest point. It was unknown how many sages' writings he had written. A drop of blood gushed out from the crack. Shi Yun and a few old scholars of Yamatai rushed to the study as fast as they could and happened to see this scene. They didn't know what had happened, but they felt a strong sense of uneasiness. They started to set up the formation again hastily, and at the same time employed the Aoran vital energy to stop Bu Qiuxiao's bleeding. But it was too late. The drop of blood on Bu Qiuxiao's right index finger suddenly dissipated, turning into a faint blood mist and spreading to the surroundings of the study. It wasn't obstructed by those formations at all. The faint blood mist drifted to the sky. It didn't take long for it to touch the real wind. A loud bang resounded. The mountains and rivers around Yamatsai were all dyed red, as if the setting sun had come to the human world ahead of time. The most terrifying thing was that the whistling wind was also dyed red, as if the whole world was on fire. The gale, which was already dreadful, became even more violent at the moment. The formation of Yamatsai was forced to show itself, giving off creaking noises as it struggled to hold on. The scholars and disciples of Yamatsai and the guests of various sects didn't know what had happened. They walked out of their cottages one after another, and were stunned speechless when they saw this strange phenomenon in the sky. Xiaohe stood up by the window in a daze. She looked at the bloody gale in the sky and sensed the even more dreadful power of heaven and earth. She covered her mouth subconsciously. The direction of the wind has changed. An old scholar suddenly shouted in a trembling voice. Countless cries of alarm rang out in Yamatsai. The wind in the 1,000-mile wind corridor had never ceased. The whole of the cultivation circle was well aware that the wind came from the underworld in the deep end of the earth and was extremely violent and dreadful. It would turn into a harmless wind and enter Chaotian after traveling for thousands of miles and being tempered by the smooth water surface and the steep valleys. The Grand Master of Yamatsai chose to establish a sect here not only to suppress the passage leading to the underworld, but also to protect the populace from disasters. But the wind had changed its direction that day. What was going on? The lotus flowers on the surface of the lake were lifted up by the sudden change of the wind and smashed to the other side of the lake. For a moment, a series of cracking noises could be heard. In a short time, tens of thousands of lotus flowers had been smashed into powder after their branches were cut off. It was a terrible scene. A terrifying shriek could be heard in the deep end of the lake. Many ink-black snakes fled to the distance, creating huge waves in the lake again. At the distant entrance of the 1,000-mile wind corridor, a great deal of wind was pouring in. Shaohezen had turned into ruins. In the deepest part of the 1,000-mile wind corridor, where the stony mountain leading to the underworld was located, the wind was even more dreadful, as if all the wind in Chaotian had gathered there. There were many cracks in the stony mountain, and the passage leading to the underworld was located at the deep end of the 1,000-mile wind corridor. The formation of Yamatsai was used to suppress the wind. A great deal of strong wind poured into the stony mountain. The edges of the cracks were visibly softened and then turned into powder. Those formations had also dispersed. The Immortal has used the blood sacrifice to form the heavenly slaying formation to change the passage of heaven and earth forcefully and let the seawater enter the underworld. After that, he has breached the Stone Bell Mountain in Yamatsai and let the strong wind enter the underworld. The wind will help the fire, and a great deal of fog will be generated. The Underworld Master gazed at the underworld river along with the wind in the high sky. He said while pointing to the green fog, "As you have guessed, the fog is poisonous. When it comes to the ground, it will kill all the mortals." Tong Yin said with a pale face, "It's like a stove. He intends to put the whole human world on it." The Underworld Master said, "The Immortal had said that heaven and earth are the stove, and everything is the bronze. No matter whether it's the humans or the underworld, how can they move forward without going through this tempering process?" Tong Yin asked, "Now we have the bellows and the stove, but what about the flue gas? Is it the heavenly well by the East Ocean?" The Underworld Master said appreciatively while looking at Tong Yin, "It said that you're the best at calculating in the Zhongzhou school, and the Aoyama sect has relied on you a lot. You're indeed extraordinary." Tong Yin said, "Then you people are destined to fail." The Underworld Master said, "It's because that place is guarded by Shui Yu Nunnery and the Guoqing Temple at the same time. You probably don't know that the Immortal had been the chief monk of the Guoqing Temple. But he has underestimated someone," Tong Yin said. The Underworld Master said with a small smile, "The Immortal has never underestimated anybody." "No," Tong Yin said. "No matter how much you value that person, you will find that you have underestimated him in the end." The seashore of the East Ocean was still tranquil. Neither the endless blue seawater pouring down from the distant ocean toward the underworld, nor the strong wind blowing madly into the underground from the deep end of the 1,000-mile wind corridor had the time to affect this place. However, the fading yellow amulet paper slips and the scripts on the cliff walls had alerted the people of the Guoqing Temple and the Shui Nunnery. A dozen elders and disciples of the Shui Nunnery arrived on the other side of the mountain. Soon after, the highly achieved monks of the Guoqing Temple had also arrived by the seashore of the East Ocean. They saw a shocking scene. The formation suppressing the heavenly well had become much weaker, and a great deal of dark and dreadful energy was spreading out to the outside world. The dark and cold energy from the underworld froze the wild grass by the cliff's edge into frost and then spread to the distance. In the deep end of the wild grass, the chief monk of the script preaching of the Guoqing Temple and the nun Shui Nunnery were also frozen into a thick layer of ice. The sunlight penetrated the layer of ice and illuminated their faces. The corners of their lips could be vaguely seen moving slightly. It was unclear if they were reciting the scripts or reciting the spell. What was going on? The people of the Guoqing Temple and the Shui Nunnery were extremely shocked. They tried to repair the formation, but they found that they couldn't pass through the dark and cold energy of the underworld. The ground suddenly quaked violently. The broken rocks fell down from the cliff walls, and the frozen wild grass broke off inch by inch. A loud thud could be heard from the underground. In the deep end of the ocean, the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect had opened his eyes. His hands formed a whirlpool with the ocean water, and he pulled them back slowly. A huge hole appeared on the cliff wall in the deep end of the ocean, with countless dead fish floating around it. They were the innocent lives crushed to death by the violent undercurrent. Looking at the scene in front of him, the great Grandmaster's eyes were full of joy and complacency. He was very satisfied with his previous palm strike, which was no better than this at his peak. The palm strike fell. Of the 33 levels of heaven in the heavenly well, 6 had been broken through. With a few more palm strikes, the heavenly well would be completely broken through. However, such a powerful palm strike had consumed a lot of his devil breath, and he needed to adjust his chi circulation for a while. The great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sat down at the bottom of the ocean again. A wisp of light green smoke rose from the bottom of the heavenly well and floated into the ocean through the crack at the bottom of the ocean. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to smell the green smoke, but the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was in such a high state that he instantly sensed it and took a deep breath. The green smoke wriggled like a snake in the ocean and floated to the tip of his nose. He inhaled it, and only a small amount of it melted into the ocean. The ocean gradually quieted down. A sea turtle swam to the great Grandmaster in bewilderment, and then quietly stopped breathing. Smelling the green smoke and looking at the dead sea turtle, the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect knew that the immortal's plan had succeeded. A maniacal smile appeared on his face, his eyes extremely bright. At the moment, he looked like a drunken old man or a toad who had absorbed the fairy energy. That sea turtle was the first life form in Chaotian to be poisoned by the green smoke of the underworld, and this was merely the beginning. As long as the heavenly well was broken through, it would form a perfect passage between heaven and earth with the huge whirlpool and the windy corridor. Nobody would be able to reverse the process, not even the fairy ladies. As more and more seawater poured down from the huge whirlpool, more and more wind poured into the underworld through the 1,000-mile windy corridor, and more flames in the underworld would rise, more green smoke would be produced. The green smoke would kill more and more lives after passing through the heavenly well and reaching the ground. No matter where they hid in the ocean or in the mountains, they couldn't escape death. In addition to Chaotian, the Penglai Island and the distant Dongi Dao couldn't escape this disaster either, and even the distant alien land would be covered by the green smoke in the end. The green smoke would be purified by heaven and earth after a few decades or 100 years, and all the mortals would die by then. It's not that simple, said Tong Yen. The green smoke is spreading everywhere in the underworld. To send it to the surface of Chaotian through the fixed passage requires a large formation, and it will take a long time to prepare such a formation. The immortal has started preparing for it since he came to the underworld for the second time. Think about how many years it will take. And I'm the executor of the plan for the underworld. The underworld master went on. This is the biggest difference between me and the grand priest. In his eyes, all the creatures in the underworld are his slaves and his property, so he doesn't want any of them to die. But I'm different. Tong, Yin said, I've always thought that you were too weak in front of Aoyama over the last 100 years. It turns out that you're using it to conceal your true purpose. The underworld master said to him with interest, You're indeed good at calculating and calculating. It's thanks to your help that I could defeat the grand priest so easily. But I don't understand why you suddenly came to the underworld again. Did you calculate all this? Jingjiu might be able to calculate all this, but I don't have such an ability. When I play chess and encounter a situation that is too complicated for me to calculate, I'm used to making decisions based on my intuition. Tong Yin went on, I didn't calculate anything back in the scenery garden, but I thought I should come to the underworld to take a look. So I came here. The underworld master remarked sentimentally, this kind of intuition on the Go board is truly a formidable thing. Fortunately, your cultivation state is not high enough, so you can't change anything even if you come here. My calculation is not as good as Jingjiu's, but I still have some ability. At least I won't make the most basic mistake. If I can't change anything even if I come here, why did I come here in the first place? A small ancient bell appeared in Tong Yan's right hand. The pupils in the underworld master's eyes shrank abruptly. His blue cloth tousled without the aid of the wind, bringing his body drifting to a distant place. Tong Yan's finger landed on this small bell. Whoosh! The sound of the bell echoed on the high platform in the cliff. The violent wind whipped up, and it was dark and gloomy. Even the flames in the distant underworld river on the ground were suppressed. The underworld master let out a grunt and crashed heavily against the cliff wall, spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood. I've canceled a trip to Arzan because I was too tired from driving. I'm going home early. I've written some accounts about this trip and posted them on R. Chapter 683. The underworld master was undoubtedly the strongest swordsman in the underworld, a figure of the same state as Bai Jinren, but he was wounded by the sound of a bell. What was this little clock? Tong Yin rang the small bell in her hand again, and her face became even paler. An invisible aura rippled out in all directions, as if it wanted to freeze and destroy everything. With a boom, the cliff collapsed. The underworld master let out a painful and angry howl as he broke through the rock and headed toward Tong Yin. Tong Yin operated Zhen Yuan to ring the bell for the third time, but she could no longer hold on and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was on the verge of being killed by the underworld master. Looking at the countless soul fires in the night sky, Tong Yan's eyes showed a look of regret. She held a hard object in her sleeve and thought quickly. A gust of wind blew across the platform, and a beam of clear light flashed past. He disappeared from where he was standing. The underworld master landed by the cliff's edge. Looking at a certain energy in the distance, he lifted his sleeve to wipe off the blood stain on the corners of his mouth. I can't believe he has the scenic cloud bell and the seal of 1,000 Mile, he said with a slightly surprised expression. The bloodstain was especially conspicuous on the sapphire blue robe, just like the bell that seemed to be echoing at this moment. The scenic cloud bell was a very special magical weapon of Zhongzhou school. It was said that it was a natural divine object that was hung on the neck of a Qilin in ancient times. It was as heavy as a mountain and could not be used through the air like flying swords or other magical weapons. It could only be used by the holder of the bell. No matter how profound a cultivator's realm was, even if it was an exiled immortal, as long as the scenic cloud bell rang in their ears, their souls would scatter, and they would be in so much pain that they wished they were dead. Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would definitely be unable to resist at all. These two sentences are completely copied from the beginning. If the immortal Tan suddenly rang the scenic cloud bell by his side, he would be dead no matter how powerful he was. No matter how talented Tong Yin was, she was still not at their level. She could only seriously injure him, but was unable to turn the situation around. Yet, what puzzled him was that the scenic cloud bell was the magic treasure of the immortal Tan, and the seal of Thousand Mile should have been taken back by the Zhongzhou school. Why did it appear in the possession of Tong Yin, the traitor of the Zhongzhou school? At this time, the world is being destroyed. Taiping Jinren looked at Jing Jiao on the other side of the cliff and said, Mingyi will come to the human world, and all the differences and disputes between us will come to an end. The wind was howling, and the sword lights were like countless fallen leaves, lingering around the cliff. No one could stand close to them. Guang Yuan Jinren and Nan Wang also rode their swords into the air. Everyone heard his words and felt the subtle changes in the aura of heaven and earth. They were shocked speechless. If what Taiping Jinren said was true, and the giant whirlpool had changed its course, led endless seawater into the netherworld, and used the netherworld river as a furnace, that would truly be the end of the world. When the seawater met the nether river, it was ignited by the wind from the 1,000-mile wind corridor and turned into poisonous vapor, rising from the heavenly well and spreading toward the earth and the ocean. No matter how vast the world was, how could it withstand the heat from the great furnace of heaven and earth? If all of this was true, then what should he do? All the gazes were fixed on Jing Jiao, wondering how he would deal with it. You're still using the same trick, said Jing Jiao as he pulled back his gaze and asked Taiping Jinren, haven't you thought of anything new? Taiping Jinren said with a small smile, there is nothing new in the world. The oldest is often the best and most effective, like you and me. Jing Jiao said, you haven't succeeded in any of your endeavors over the last hundreds of years. You should be well aware of the reason. I prepared for it for hundreds of years, and the only thing that can stop me is Aoyama. But I'm in Aoyama now. Taiping Jinren looked at the small green curtained sedan, the immortal Tan, and the patch of cloud and fog, saying, and these people are all here for Aoyama. Who can stop me? The cultivation practitioners of Chaotian had all come here for the grand ceremony of the sect master of Aoyama, which was why the passages leading to the underworld were so vulnerable. This scheme was simple to describe, but it was actually quite ingenious. Hearing this, Ozawa Ling and the others were furious. Even those elders of Aoyama who supported Taiping Jinren had a slight change of expression on their faces. Guang Yun Jinren sighed dejectedly. No need to feel sad, Taiping Jinren said, while looking at the people around Tingguang Peak. What happened today has nothing to do with you people. The smoke coming from the underworld won't harm you. You people will live well, and you will feel more peaceful. What about our families? What about our offsprings? They will all die. An angry voice burst out in the sky. It was unclear which cultivation practitioner the speaker was from. Taiping Jinren said, those mortals will die sooner or later. What difference does it make if they die one day earlier or one day later? This nonchalant statement echoed around Tingguang Peak, but it made all the other voices disappear. It was because the statement contained a great deal of indifference and cruelty. After an unknown period of time, a slightly trembling voice rang out. Master, why is this happening? The speaker was Nan Wang. She stared blankly at Taiping Jinren on the edge of the cliff. Her eyes were full of confusion, just like the little girl who had just joined the sect. Taiping Jinren looked at her and smiled tenderly, saying nothing. Many cultivation practitioners who were qualified to attend the grand ceremony of the sect leader in Aoyama knew about the secret that happened hundreds of years ago. They knew that Taiping Jinren wanted to kill all mortals and build a world where only cultivation practitioners existed. But not everyone knew the real reason for his madness. After Nan Wang broke through the state of heavenly arrival, she vaguely guessed something, but she couldn't help but want an answer from her master. What is the purpose of cultivation? Ascension, of course, because it seems to be the only way for human cultivation practitioners to achieve immortality. Taiping Jinren looked at the gray sky, full of thunder and lightning, and said calmly, "What is the place after ascension? Is it the fairy world or the upper world?" Back when I looked up at the mouth of the heavenly well in the underworld, I thought of this question. Chaotian is the upper world for the underworld. But is it the fairy world? No, it's merely another place. Many cultivation practitioners felt restless, wondering where else would it be if it wasn't the fairy world after ascension. Some of them, like the immortal Tan, remained silent. Looking at the immortal Tan, Taiping Jinren continued, "There is a powerful barrier between us and that world. The purpose of ascension is to break through this barrier. If you people go there, you will find that it is not the fairy world, but a strange, cold, and almost dead world where a powerful being lives. You haven't ascended yet. How can you be so sure?" asked Zhao Liu. "I've been the highest person in this world since many years ago, so it's natural that I can see further." Taiping Jinren pressed, while still looking at the immortal Tan. "Do you think I'm wrong?" The immortal Tan remained silent. As Taiping Jinren said this, he didn't stop contending with Jingjiu for the control of the inherited heaven sword. The great formation of green light enshrouding the peaks had gradually lowered to the ground, the cracks on the surface growing larger. The thunder and lightning in the dark clouds struck down incessantly, cutting the lake water on Bihu Peak into various shapes. The snowstorm on Shangda Peak grew stronger, and the sword wills on the Sword Peak grew more chaotic. Soon, they formed a formidable sword will in the air, enshrouding Taiping Jinren and Jingjiu. The trees were broken down soundlessly, and the cliffs collapsed, giving off thudding sounds. The strong wind whistled, making the cultivation practitioners' faces turn pale and their clothes look like flags. But the wind couldn't disperse the patch of cloud and fog, so they couldn't see by Jinren's face. An aged and deep voice rang out. It was the old monk of the Guochang Temple. The heavenly demons of the outside world have been mentioned in the ancient scripts of the Zen sections. In fact, in addition to the ancient scripts of the Zen sects, there are also many obscure records of the heavenly demons in the Taoist sections. However, for various understandable reasons, those speculations and theories were like a wildflower among the green grasses, hidden and hard to be discovered. Taiping Jinren looked at Jingjiu and asked, "You should know what that coward on the island of the fallen immortals said, and you might have even seen it with your own eyes. What do you think?" Jingjiu didn't answer the question as he gazed at a distant place through the ocean of clouds, the lightning bolts, and the snowstorm. He had told Zhao Liu that he had seen tens of thousands of burning flying swords traveling like shooting stars in the distant Milky Way after his ascension. If every flying sword was a ferryman who had successfully ascended, how powerful and formidable was that world? Crack! Several flashes of lightning illuminated Bihu Peak, and then the rain began to fall. The sword wills of the sword formation of Aoyama all fell on Jingjiu and Taiping Jinren. The sword wills were getting weaker and weaker and couldn't even block the wind and rain in the real world. "This world is too weak," Taiping Jinren said with pity while looking at the peaks and the wind and rain. The rain fell on a slightly dark face and also soaked his clothes. He looked a little disheveled, and also a little like those old farmers who were rescuing people at the breach of a river. Chapter 684. It was raining cats and dogs. The top of Tingguang Peak was hit by the raindrops, creating a lot of smoke and dust, which soon turned into mud and was washed down by the water into the ocean of clouds at the foot of the cliff. The strong wind and the raindrops hit the hut, making pa sounds. Staring at Taiping Jinren at the edge of the cliff, Zhao Liu asked, "If what you said is true, why didn't those heavenly demons attack us?" Taiping Jinren was still looking at the peaks in the rain, letting the rainwater flow on his face as he said, "It's because there's a barrier between us and the outside world, or it's because we don't have enough spiritual energy here to attract their attention. Even if it's true, what does it have to do with your evil deeds?" Zhao Liu wiped the rainwater off her face, her black and white eyes more distinct. "You must be going to ascend. Taiping Jinren turned to her and said with a smile, "Have you ever thought about what you will leave behind when you leave this world? What will you take with you?" Ascension was not death, so it didn't apply to the saying, "You can't take with you when you're alive, and you can't take with you when you die." Before the fairy lady Bai Run ascended, she had left 3 main fairy books and 3 accessory fairy books of the 6 paths to Zhongzhou school. But what did he mean by this question? Zhao Liu said, "I'll take my sword with me." Taiping Jinren said with a smile, "Wrong. You'll also take the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in your body with you." Upon hearing this, some people seemed to understand something. The essence of cultivation was to take the spiritual energy of heaven and earth for one's own use. The higher a cultivation practitioner's state was, the more spiritual energy of heaven and earth in his body would be. Those figures in the state of heavenly arrival had cultivated for hundreds of years, and the amount of spiritual energy they had taken from heaven and earth was unimaginable. And how much would the fairy lady who ascended take with her? This world is a place separated from the outside world. It doesn't have any spiritual energy from the outside world to supplement it. It just circulates on its own. Taiping Jinren pointed to the sky above the heavy rain and said, "When one ascends, he will take away a great deal of spiritual energy of heaven and earth." The cycle repeats. One day, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in this world will become thinner and thinner until the barrier can no longer be maintained. What was that barrier? Was it the thunder domain with its berserk energy, or was it the faintly discernible boundary? Taiping Jinren's voice traveled through the rainstorm, reverberating in the mountain peak and the sky, falling into the ears of all the cultivation practitioners. If the barrier collapses and the lightning domain disappears, this world will be exposed to the outside world. If we're discovered, it's extremely likely that we'll be instantly destroyed. How should we solve this problem? Looking at the immortal tan in the sky, Jing Ju said nonchalantly, "Byron hasn't gone far after her ascension. She's guarding the outside. Is she thinking of killing all the other ascendants?" The immortal Tan had finally broken the silence, saying, "I don't know." The immortal Taiping demanded while staring into Jingzhou's eyes, "Why haven't you dared think about ascension all these years?" The immortal Tan fell silent again. The patch of cloud and fog by his side was drifting slightly, so the raindrops falling from the sky couldn't enter it. Taiping Jinren said, while shaking his head, "The behavior of the great grandmaster Bai seems to be radical. But in fact, he's as clingy as the Zhongzhou school has been in the last 30,000 years. He's merely acting like a turtle." Hearing this comment, the elders of the Zhongzhou school had a terrible look on their faces. Taiping Jinren continued, "What our Aoyama cultivates is the sword, so we have to poke the sky open. How can we be trapped here all the time? Yet, we have to make some preparations before we poke the sky open. The first thing I want to do is to reform this world. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth is limited in this world, and the resources are also limited. According to the current situation, the speed of development is extremely slow. Why should we waste our time and energy on those useless mortals? Let's just kill them all." It was a nonchalant statement and a careless conclusion, but it was like a thunder exploding in a rainstorm. A cultivation practitioner couldn't help but ask, regardless of how evil and cruel this proposal is, if the cultivation practitioners concentrate on their cultivation, who will do the mundane chores? Of course, it will be done by those who are less talented in cultivation. Taiping Jinren said indifferently, whether it's planting herbs or mining, the abilities of the cultivation practitioners are far beyond that of the mortals. If they're allowed to do these things, this world will become stronger faster. More importantly, the cultivation practitioners are used to being the upper class in this world, receiving the support of the mortals. They've endured too little hardship and indulged in peace and happiness. How can they continue like this? Someone else said with fear and confusion, "Why are those cultivation practitioners who are less talented willing to listen to you?" Taiping Jinren looked at a certain place in the rainstorm and found that it was an elder of the Kunlun sect. He smiled and said, "Do you really love our Aoyama sect and that's why you've come to participate in today's ceremony. But, Grandmaster, the number of cultivation practitioners is too small. No matter how smart you are, you can't arrange all of them. It was Zhuo Ruzhui who spoke this time. His expression was still innocent, but his eyes were very cold. Taiping Jinren smiled and said, "Then let's just have a few more." Zhuo Ruzhui's eyes became even colder. He said, "Even if they're cultivation partners, it's possible that they will give birth to offspring who can't cultivate." Taiping Jinren said, "Then let's kill them again." The rainstorm was pouring, like crying, like complaining. The whole world seemed to be wailing. Everyone present had already guessed the answer, including Zhuo Ruzhui. He just wanted to hear it from Taiping Jinren himself, because the answer was too evil, too cold-blooded, and too unbelievable. Even the bloody demon church in the past would not have such a horrifying, bloody, and cruel idea. Countless gazes passed through the rainstorm and fell on the figure at the edge of the cliff, as if they had seen the most terrifying demon in tens of thousands of years. Hundreds of years ago, it was because of these answers that Taiping Jinren suddenly became the public enemy of the cultivation world from the leader of Aoyama. It wasn't until now that many people believed that this was the truth of the story, and that there was no betrayal or frame-up. The elder Mo Chi and many elders of Aoyama were speechless, their faces pale. Level by level, level by level. Only in this way can this world grow stronger faster. Being stared at by countless fearful, hateful, and disgusted gazes, Taiping Jinren's countenance remained calm. Zhao Liu shot a glance at Jingjiao. He had told her about Taiping Jinren's ambition and his idea on the lake outside Jiaoga City many years ago. What would he say today? It's been hundreds of years. I've thought about this matter many times, but I still think your idea and action are idiotic. Jingjiao's voice was cold and calm, but seemed to be able to suppress the sound of the rainstorm. He pulled back his gaze from the horizon and said to Taiping Jinren, "If you want to accomplish these things, you should let me ascend first." Even if you guessed that Byron was waiting outside, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth she brought with her would come back to me after I killed her. If you did this, I would stay in Chaotian the entire time. How could you accomplish these things? Taiping Jinren said, "It's because I didn't expect you to use the formation of dispersed smoke and cloud to ascend, and you didn't die after the failure and came back." Jingjiu said, "I have to be cautious when it comes to ascension. Some cultivation practitioners recalled the arrogant sword light that struck the heavenly thunder from the top of the Shima Peak more than 100 years ago, wondering why he had to be cautious." Taiping Jinren said, while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, "It's true that I didn't intend to let you ascend successfully in the first place. It's because I don't want this world to take any risks before I'm ready for it, so there can't be any ascendance. But the formation of dispersed smoke and cloud is fine, and I've made some modifications to it. When everything is ready, all the cultivation practitioners will learn this formation and ascend at the same time by connecting all the spiritual sources in the world. Only in this way will they be able to survive and even seize the worlds of the heavenly demons and the so-called fairymen. Even if they can't, the cultivation practitioners who have ascended and left this world will at least leave some seeds behind. Young brother, tell me, what did I do wrong? How am I an idiot? Jingjiu said, "Your idea and action are idiotic regardless of whether it's right or wrong. It's because it's a delusion in the end, and it can't happen in reality." Crack! A few bolts of lightning struck down. This time, they didn't strike Bihu Peak, but somewhere close to the top of Tingguang Peak, illuminating the two figures by the cliff's edge in the rainstorm. The violent wind was howling, sweeping the raindrops in all directions. The inherited heaven sword remained motionless in the rain, as if it were a holy object that was absolutely still. Taiping Jinren spread his arms to welcome the violent wind and rain, saying, "Using heaven and earth as a furnace, destroying the world and regenerating it. This scene is happening in front of your eyes. But I don't believe that you can predict everything in advance, because you don't care about this world at all. Compared to me, you are the real cold-blooded one." "You're right. I didn't predict everything, because this world is too vast, much larger than a sand table. There are countless possibilities in deduction, and it's hard to exhaust them all. Jingjiu said, "Many years ago, when Littlefur tried to kill me for the first time, I had an idea. Why should I predict what you're thinking?" Since then, he took out the ceramic plate filled with sand less and less, and played that game less and less. No matter what you want to do, you can't surpass me. As such, you have to come to me. Jingjiu continued calmly while looking at Taiping Jinren, Amaoyama. I'm sitting here, waiting for you to come to me. Then I'll kill you. This is the simplest way to solve the problem. Taiping Jinren remarked sentimentally. Even if you could kill me, this world would still be destroyed. You're still thinking about yourself. Following his sigh, countless gazes fell on Jingjiu. You want to lead this world forward, but you don't understand this world at all. This world has its own internal rules, which are more powerful than you and I can imagine, said Jingjiu. When this world is on the verge of destruction, someone will come forward. Taiping Jinren said with a faint smile. Bu Qiuxiao is traveling the world mentally before becoming the saint, unable to wake up. Chao Yuan is severely wounded and no longer has the edge. The only person outside of Aoyama is that little monk, but he is still in the snowland. Who can come forward and change all this? Most of the strongest swordsmen in Chaotian were in Aoyama at the moment. It was too late for them to go to the passages leading to the underworld to save the world from destruction. Not even the fastest flying swords could do it. This world has nurtured me for 1,000 years. As such, I should strike first. Having said that, Jingjiu reached out his right hand. A green bamboo board lay on his palm in silence. A golden rooster was carved on the bamboo board. The lines were vivid and vivid. It seemed to come alive after being soaked by the rainwater. It was a little rooster. It was also the lifeboard of the Dark Phoenix. It was because it had another name, the Devil Rooster. The blood in this lifeboard had been taken out many years ago. Jingjiu couldn't do anything to the Dark Phoenix back at the West Ocean. It was meaningless for him to take it out now. The expression on Taiping Jinren's face changed slightly as he thought of something. Huh! A raindrop broke into pieces on the bamboo board. The bamboo board was broken into pieces. I know you people will say that the monthly votes are broken. Don't do that. You can't threaten me. I haven't asked for the monthly votes in the last few years. Let's change the method. For example, your hearts are broken. That's so nauseating. Chapter 685. Taiping Jinren had prepared for hundreds of years for this plan, from the underworld to the human world, from the imperial court to the countryside, from the bank of the muddy river to the cloud platform, and back to Aoyama. He had calculated all possible scenarios. Bulow Lin, who was all over the world, had collected a great deal of information for him to ensure that he wouldn't make a wrong judgment at the critical junctures. Zen Master was indeed in White Town, because he had to guard the snowland. It was well known that the Broadsword King Chao Yuan had been severely wounded in the fight with the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom and hadn't shown up in the human world for nearly 100 years. Bu Qiuxiao was at the critical moment before he became the saint. He sat in the deep part of Yamat's High, mentally traveling between heaven and earth, unable to wake up. Like Taiping Jinren said, Jingjiu couldn't calculate everything. But how could he calculate everything clearly? How could he know what choices those people would make at certain moments? What kind of accident would be waiting for him? The strong wind was howling in Yamat's High. The willow trees by the shore were uprooted, and tens of thousands of lotuses in the lake were broken, fluttering in the air like broken hats or bobbing up and down on the surface of the water. It was a dreadful scene. More terrifyingly, the wind had been dyed red, looking like a steaming bloody fog, full of murderous intent. The formation that had been guarding the passage of the underworld for many years had lost its effect. The stone bell mountain at the end of the 1,000-mile wind corridor was riddled with holes, and the whimpering sound was more like a broken flute than a bell. The hard rocks were turned into powder, flowing into the dark and gloomy underground along with the wind. It was unclear how long it would take for the powder to reach the underworld river, creating more fire and smoke. A thin red feather was fluttering in the strong wind, looking down at the scholars of Yamatai who were trying to repair the formation on the ground. The red feather looked like an indifferent and emotionless eye. All of a sudden, a greenish light shone down from the distant sky. The greenish light didn't melt when it encountered the blood-red, chaotic wind. On the contrary, it expanded as it met the blood-red, chaotic wind. Whoosh! The chaotic wind spread its wings and turned into a bluebird. The bluebird's eyes were full of anger. It pecked at the red feather with a faint chirp. The red feather seemed to have a mind of its own. It dove with the wind and instantly went to the surface of the lake more than 10 miles away. On the undulating surface of the lake, there was a pitiful, broken lotus. The blue bird suddenly flew out from the broken lotus. Like lightning, it stretched out its beak and accurately caught the red feather. It flapped its wings and flew high into the sky, quickly disappearing into the horizon. The Yamatai scholars took the opportunity to carve amulets on the cliff walls against the strong wind. The Yamatai scholars started to carve amulets on the cliff walls against the strong wind. The scholars of the one cottage house took advantage of the opportunity to carve the amulets on the cliff walls against the strong wind in an attempt to slow down the disintegration of the formation. However, the passage leading to the underworld had already been opened, and the energy between the two worlds was connected. As a result, the hurricane was too formidable to be blocked by the amulet power. The strong wind was still pouring into the cracks and the caves. The amulet paper slips were torn to shreds as soon as they were pasted on the cliff walls. Even the words carved on the cliff walls were visibly flattened. Whether it was using amulets or carving words, they all consumed a great deal of righteous chi. In just a few dozen breaths, many scholars collapsed to the ground, and some even fainted. But none of the scholars who could still stand left. They continued to work hard, using their strength to fight against the power of heaven and earth. The blood they spat out could be seen everywhere on the cliff walls. Shi Yun and a dozen teachers stood at the place where the wind was the strongest and the situation was the most dangerous. Their faces were extremely pale, and their chi was constantly being consumed. It seemed like they couldn't hold on much longer. It was at this moment that the wind around the simple residents in the depths of Yamatai suddenly became much weaker, and so did the annoying whimpers. Buqiu opened his eyes and glanced outside the window. He smelled the remaining scent in the wind and glanced at his fingers. He knew what had happened. He stood up and drifted out of the house. Huh! He tiptoed on the surface of the lake and flew away with the wind. Soon, he arrived at the end of the wind corridor in front of the Stone Bell Mountain. The young scholars of Yamatai yelled in surprise. House Master! The dozen old scholars in the front changed their expressions abruptly, showing a look of regret in their eyes. Looking at the familiar figure in the sky, Shi Yun was extremely sad. He murmured, Teacher. In his mind, Buqiu had entered the state of emptiness dozens of days ago. He had been traveling around heaven and earth with his spirit, comprehending the meaning of nature and waiting for the final moment to become a saint. At this moment, he couldn't sense anything outside his body. So why did he wake up earlier than expected? It was because his spiritual awareness, which was traveling between heaven and earth, had sensed the upheaval of heaven and earth, traveling around heaven and earth with his spirit and coming back. This meant that he had missed the chance to become a saint again. He didn't know how many years of arduous cultivation he would have to go through, and it was even possible that he wouldn't have the chance again. Buqiu didn't pay attention to the shouts of the disciples. He reached out his right hand and pointed it at the cliff wall. He usually used his right hand to write. When he held the brush, his index finger was at the highest point. Today, his index finger was cut by the red feather, leaving a tiny cut, and the blood had already clotted. At this moment, the cut opened again, and a drop of blood oozed out. Soon after, more and more drops of blood flew out, forming a line of blood and falling on the cliff wall. The blood was like ink, splashing and falling on those cracks from time to time, in an attempt to seal them and prevent the chaotic wind from pouring into the underworld. Even though he was Bu Xiao, how could he resist the power of heaven and earth? Seeing the blood being blown away by the chaotic wind and Bu Xiao's face turning paler and paler, Shi Yun felt even more pained. A question arose in his mind. The human world has encountered such a great calamity. Teacher, you chose to come back and give up the chance to become a saint, but you still can't change anything. Is it worth it? Bu Xiao knew the current situation better than anyone else. If he chose to wake up earlier, he wouldn't be able to become a saint. If he couldn't become a saint, he wouldn't be able to turn the tide. But how could he not wake up when the tide was right in front of him? This is really not an interesting topic. He kept writing meaningless words on the cliff wall of the Stone Bell Mountain with the blood. Thinking of this, he curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a bitter smile. In the next moment, something that no one could have imagined happened. The bloodstains on the cliff wall suddenly emitted a bright glow, becoming redder. No matter how strong and fierce the wind blowing from all over the world was, it couldn't dilute the bloodstains anymore. The bloodstains were getting redder and redder, but they didn't have any smell of blood. Instead, they looked extremely solemn, like a red brush on a piece of paper. The entire Stone Bell Mountain gradually stabilized. The cliff wall stopped weakening, and the cracks were gradually sealed by the blood. The passage to the underworld became smaller and smaller. So did the wind. What was going on? The young scholars were shocked, speechless. Shi Yun revealed a perplexed expression. Ha ha ha! Bu Xiao was still laughing. There was no trace of bitterness on his face. He was as innocent as a child, and he even laughed out loud. His laughter echoed on the cliff wall, suppressing the whimpers that sounded like broken flutes. He was also a naive young man when he first entered Yamatai to study. But because of his master, he had to shoulder the responsibility and the pressure too early. The scholar Yin, who had left Yamatai and the conversation with Jingjiu in the Old Plum Garden, had made the pressure heavier and heavier. It wasn't until today, at this moment, that he finally unloaded all the pressure from his shoulders. This is the blood of a saint. The house master has become a saint. A few old scholars of Yamatai shouted in ecstasy. Yes, Bu Xiao had become a saint. Facing the great calamity of the human world, he chose to give up becoming a saint. He was a saint. The wind is rising. Zen master stood at the door of the small temple, rubbing his bare feet on the door sill. He looked quite nervous. He looked into the distance, his face full of worry. But what he was looking at was not the snowland, but the distant east. The energy of heaven and earth had changed, a great change, which meant that something major was going to happen in this world, even more serious than the queen of the snowy kingdom giving birth. The wind in White Town wasn't strong at the moment, but Zen Master's heart grew heavier and heavier as he thought of the long distance that the wind was traveling to. He loosened his fingers. The result of the two-mind connection was not good. What made him feel even more helpless was that White Town was too far away for him to get to those places in time. How could he stop this catastrophe? The doorsill was broken by his bare feet. Zen Master came up to the sky and opened his right hand slightly, aiming the light mirror at the deep part of the snowland. The sunlight fell on the mirror and was refracted northward, crossing the endless snowland. Instead of scattering, the sunlight became brighter and more precise, without any deviation. Tens of thousands of miles away, the lonely and lofty icy peak was illuminated by the sunlight, emitting a pale blue glow. A streak of spiritual awareness emerged from the icy peak and crossed the snowland in an instant, arriving in front of the small temple in White Town. It carried the anger of being disturbed and a hint of curiosity. The fierce wind was howling, and the snowflakes were flying in all directions. The believers and soldiers in the small town were screaming and hiding. This was the majesty of the queen of the snowy kingdom. If I didn't miscalculate, the passage to the underworld should have undergone a drastic change, and Taiping Jinren is destroying the world. Looking at tens of thousands of miles away, Zen Master said with a pale face, "You should have sensed it earlier, and you should have figured it out. He wants to kill all the creatures of the snowy kingdom in addition to the mortals of the world, so as to eliminate the threat of the monster invasion. The indifferent and powerful will of the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom came through the divine awareness. What does it have to do with me? Every few hundred years, a terrifying monster invasion would occur in the north of Chaotian. In the beginning, the swordsmen of the human race thought it was an attempt by the Snowy Kingdom to invade the south and occupy the territory of the human race. Now, they speculated that it was because the number of monsters of the Snowy Kingdom in the midst of the snow and ice was so great that the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom ordered them to invade the south and use the humans to kill them. If that was the case, why would the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom care about the destruction of Taipingzhenren? Zen Master looked into the depths of the snowy plain and said sincerely, "In the end, those are your people. You can let them die, but how can you let them die to the schemes of others?" The Queen of Snowy Kingdom's reply was still clear and cold. "What does that have to do with me? Yes, this matter has nothing to do with you. If you don't do anything, I will accept your kindness." A deep and resounding voice came from the ground. The spiritual awareness of the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom gradually faded away. She actually acquiesced. The young Zen master spun his head and looked down at White Town in surprise. The voice was still echoing in the town, sounding like the ringing of a bell, incessantly. The blood-red cliff quivered slightly, and the accumulated snow on the peak top fell down, piling up behind the small temple. In the small temple, the unimaginably heavy iron broadsword, longer than the beam of the house, was still placed on the shelf in silence. A hand suddenly grabbed the hilt of the broadsword. The hand was full of wounds and scars, looking like the peeling paint of a Buddhist statue. Chapter 686. Along with a creaking sound, the saber was lifted up. Smoke and dust rose, and the saber frame collapsed into pieces. Few people in the world could lift this saber or even hold it tightly. It was not hard to imagine how big the hand full of scars was. "You stay here and watch. I'll be right back." The deep and vigorous voice sounded again, coming out of the small temple, echoing in White Town, and falling into the sky. Looking at the small temple, Zen Master's eyes were full of surprise, wondering if his injury had been healed. How could he get there from so far away? The blood-red cliff suddenly collapsed. A powerful force gushed out from the underground and exploded right under the small temple. Amidst the loud rumbling sound, the small temple was smashed into pieces. The strong wind whistled, and a huge silhouette could be vaguely seen breaking through the sky. It smashed hundreds of huge rocks and instantly became a small black dot high up in the sky. It entered the emptiness realm and disappeared. The wind was blowing by the East Sea. The chief monk of the instruction hall of the Guoqing Temple and the unknown Nun Shui Yu nunnery were sitting in the weeds. The wrinkles on their faces were deep, and the frost on their faces was even thicker, as if they had turned into two ice men. The talisman paper on the cliff swayed with the wind, and the stone carvings faded away. The blue seawater kept surging. It was unclear whether it was because of the mud and sand at the bottom of the sea or the influence of the peerless demonic magic, but the color of the seawater became darker and darker, as if it was ink. The swordsmen of the Guoqing Temple and Shui Yu nunnery were sitting around the cliff with their legs crossed, fighting against the extreme coldness. At the same time, they were trying to stabilize the heavenly well, but they were unable to do so. Thin ice floated on the surface of the sea, like shredded paper falling on the ink pool. With a splash, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect broke out of the sea. The sea breeze blew gently, and the water on his body disappeared. His sparse hair fluttered again. He was about to break through the 33 levels of heaven in the heavenly well. Even though he was a great grandmaster of the deviant sects in the realm of the immanent deity, he was still exhausted and needed to adjust his chi circulation. He didn't even look at the swordsmen of the Guoqing Temple and Shui Yu nunnery. He squinted at the direction of the Aoyama, wondering how the immortal was doing. Suddenly, he sensed something and looked up at the sky. The sky was dark blue, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. However, His expression suddenly changed. With a look of disbelief, he muttered, "How can he be so strong? So fast?" At this moment, a gust of wind suddenly came from the dark heavenly well. Then, the light in the air suddenly changed, and a light smoke swept out of the ground and landed on the cliff, right under a row of scriptures. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect looked down at the bottom of the cliff and found that the person's eyebrows were very light and somewhat childish. Guessing the person's identity, he exclaimed in surprise, "You are still alive?" That person was Tong Yin, who had escaped from the underworld with the help of the 1,000-mile seal. Her face was pale, and her expression was gloomy. It was obvious that she was severely injured. "If the heavenly well hadn't been opened up by you, I don't think it would have been so easy for me to come back," he said to the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect smiled and said, "Boy, do you think your return will solve these problems? This junior had a low cultivation state, so I can't, but someone else can, like that person who flew over from the sky earlier." Having said this, Tong Yin patted the cliff wall with his hand, showing a sentimental and fortunate expression. His palm landed on the character at the bottom of the scriptures. The character was dark red in color, so deep that it penetrated the cliff wall. It had faded a great deal earlier, but it became much brighter now thanks to the efforts of the Guoqing Temple and the highly achieved swordsmen of Shui Nunnery. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect didn't notice this detail because his mind was still in a state of shock. "Is it really that person?" he murmured. "I told the underworld master that Taiping Jinren and you people had underestimated one person, and that person is him." Tong Yin continued while patting the cliff wall. "It looks like what I said is not accurate. You people have underestimated many people, including me." No sooner had he said this than he shattered the cliff wall with his palm and grabbed the dark red character from the broken stones. The expression on the face of the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect changed slightly. He waved his hand, and a band of extremely dark and gloomy demonic flame shot over. Tong Yin didn't pay any attention to him. He slapped the wild grass by his side with his palm. The nun Shui Nunnery, who had broken the forbidding formation of the courtyard, was in this patch of wild grass. Did she choose a place to stay the moment she escaped from the heavenly well? "Huh!" Tong Yan's right hand shattered the ice, covering the head of the nun, and poured the character into it. The nun Shui Nunnery opened her eyes abruptly, revealing an incredulous and hopeless expression as she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. In the next moment, a great deal of blood sprayed out from the surface of her body. The blood couldn't spill out, but it sprayed on the ice around her body, as if it had been dyed red. In fact, her body had already been broken into countless pieces. The character Tong Yin plucked from the scriptures on the cliff wall was Jie. This scene was extremely weird and bloody, but he didn't see it himself. His body suddenly disappeared and drifted to the other side of the cliff. The demon fire mixed with coldness and terrible heat roared from the seashore. The frozen wild grass was broken inch by inch and wrapped around his body. The escape method of heaven and earth of Zhongzhou school was indeed powerful. At the most dangerous moment, Tong Yan's figure disappeared in the air again. When he reappeared, he had fallen into the wild grass on the other side of the cliff. The chief monk of scripture preaching hall of Guoqing Temple was in this patch of wild grass. His old face and skinny body were covered with thick ice. Tong Yin had a very high talent for cultivation. After years of closed-door training in the hermit peaks of Aoyama, he had reached a very profound state. But it was difficult for him to kill this old monk in a short time. At this moment, the horrible demon fire came to the front of the cliff. Like the dark night, it would devour everything. Tong Yin didn't dodge anymore. Standing in front of the chief monk of scripture preaching hall, he looked at the demon fire and the great Grand Master of mysterious dark sects standing outside the demon fire. He slightly raised his eyebrows and suddenly smiled. The scheme of Taiping Jinren seemed simple, but it was actually extraordinary. Even words that were commonly used to express extreme shock couldn't be used to describe it. The scheme wasn't that complicated. It didn't have grass snakes, gray lines, or thousands of miles of hidden lines. It even seemed simple and crude, and was considered old-fashioned by Jing Luo. But the scheme was too grand. Whether it was in history books or in stories, there were many so-called grand arrangements. The overall situation was just one word, but what could be compared to this one? This scheme used the force of nature to destroy the world. The heaven and earth were the real furnaces. The 1,000-mile wind corridor was the bellows. The heavenly well was the smoke passage. The underworld river was the fire. The huge whirlpool was the stove. The endless seawater that flowed into the underworld through the huge whirlpool was the endless firewood. It was hard to say which of these places was more important, but there was a saying, take the firewood from under the pot. To stop this world-destroying scheme, the simplest way was, of course, to remove the firewood from the stove. At least, they couldn't let the firewood continue to fill the stove. The huge whirlpool was the key to the entire scheme of world-destroying. Hundreds of demons fell into the huge whirlpool painfully while competing with each other. They broke through the glass-like seawater and fell down along the waterfall, and were cut into countless blood clots by the formation. The blood of the demons, which contained a greedy and brutal energy, dyed the rumbling seawater red like fog, making the heavenly slaying formation more powerful. In the deep part of the ocean, more demons were swimming toward the formation, leaving countless white lines in their wake. Innumerable dark clouds gathered in the sky, and a downpour started. The dreadful energy exuded by countless demons could be sensed by heaven and earth. The life forms living in the ocean were terrified to the extreme, but they couldn't escape from the formidable energy and died one after another. The dead fish were everywhere in the ocean. If someone sank to the bottom of the ocean and looked down, they would see a forest of corpses. The dark phoenix was flying in the downpour, his wings flapping slowly. The lightning bolts were circling around him. Looking at the scene on the ocean, his eyes were devoid of any emotion. He appeared exceedingly cruel and confident. To say nothing of the fact that the swordsmen of Chaotian couldn't come here. They were no match for him, even if they could. He was the guardian of Aoyama in the heavenly arrival state, and he was the main operator of the heavenly slaying formation that day. As such, what could Bai Jinren do to him even if he came here? The downpour suddenly stopped. The thunder stopped as well. The dark phoenix suddenly felt uneasy, lifting his head to look at the sky. Boom! A hole appeared in the sky. To put it more precisely, the invisible barrier between the empty realm and the chaotic wind was broken forcefully, and it couldn't be repaired in a short time. If the barrier of heaven and earth could be broken, the dark clouds would be even more so. A ray of sunlight shone down from the high sky, passing through the dark clouds and reaching the surface of the ocean. There was a huge figure in the ray of sunlight, surrounded by countless bolts of lightning. The sunlight brought the figure down slowly to the surface of the ocean until it reached the huge whirlpool. The demons who had broken through the waterfall and leaped toward the whirlpool and death suddenly let out shrill screams, showing extreme pain and fear, but also a hint of anticipation and relief. The dark clouds dispersed at an unimaginable speed. The sunlight illuminated the ocean and the huge whirlpool again. The huge figure turned out to be a Buddha statue. The Buddha statue faced the sunlight, its paint mottled. It was a terrible sight to behold, as if it had suffered all kinds of sufferings in the world, but its eyes were closed, as if it couldn't bear to see any suffering. The heavenly killing formation made the most intense reaction. Countless bloody and extremely powerful auras came from its surroundings and bombarded the Buddha statue. The Buddha statue opened its eyes, the expression in his eyes calm and benevolent. Looking at the countless dead creatures in the ocean and sensing the evilness and power of the heavenly slaying formation, he raised his iron broadsword, the expression in his eyes turning cold and powerful. The Buddha raised his broadsword, and he became a saint. I was in a bad mood yesterday, so I poured myself a glass of whiskey and drank with my friends in Ichang. Then I chatted with Butterfly Blue in the comment section of a friend's WeChat moments, and felt a bit better. Then I suddenly saw the third young master say in the group that Lattice had left. To be honest, I was in a daze for a long time. We mortals can't become saints, so we can only try our best to live a happy life every day. I haven't seen Lattice for many years, and we haven't talked for a long time. But based on my understanding of him, his life was rich and reckless. May he rest in peace, and I hope he didn't suffer when he left. I wish everyone good health and a long life. Chapter 687. Tong Yin told the underworld master that Taiping Jinren had underestimated someone. The underworld master thought he was referring to Jing Yang, but he was actually referring to the broadsword king, Chao Yuan. Like most mortals and cultivation practitioners in Chao Tian, they would think of this name as soon as the world was on the brink of destruction. No matter how high the immortal Jing Yang and the immortals Tan and Bai were, their cultivation states were imperceptible. Chao Yuan was different. He was the disciple experiencing the mortal world of the Guoqing Temple and had been in the human world for a great many years, leading the windy broadsword church and killing the demons and resisting the snowy kingdom. He guarded the wind and snow alone and protected the human race. Everybody could see his prowess and fearlessness. Yet, not many people had seen his true appearance. He had been staying in that small temple the entire time. He went to the snowland to fight the queen every time he came out of the temple, but he was defeated a few times. Those who crossed the doorsill and entered the small temple could only hear his voice and see the golden Buddha statue, but they didn't know where he was. The clouds broke apart that day, and the sunlight shone on the ocean. The ocean waves rolled down to the bottom of the ocean soundlessly. The demons leaped out of the transparent wall of water and headed toward the huge Buddha statue in the huge whirlpool while uttering sad cries and cheers of relief. It turned out that the golden Buddha statue in the small temple was Chao Yuan himself. The Guoqing Temple and the Baodong Zen Temple and the Shui Yu Nunnery also worshipped the Buddha statue, but there was no Buddha in this world. Chao Yuan had the world in his heart and was unparalleled in his bravery, so he became the Buddha statue. When Chao Yuan held the iron broadsword and pointed it at the snowland in the north or the endless ocean surface that looked like a huge wall, the Buddha became the broadsword king. It was not that the broadsword king was more powerful than the Buddha, but that he was more capable of fighting. The dark clouds dispersed abruptly, and the rainstorm abated. Only a few drops of water were still falling down. Countless blue electric arcs hovered around Chao Yuan's body and then gradually disappeared. In the higher sky, the dark phoenix flapped his wings to disperse the annoying electric arcs. Looking at the Buddha statue in the huge whirlpool below, a bewildered expression showed in his eyes. This person was severely wounded in the fight with the queen of the snowy kingdom and couldn't leave the small temple. When did he recover? And why did he feel that he was even more powerful than rumored? No matter how powerful he was, how could he travel tens of thousands of miles from White Town to the depths of the ocean in such a short time? Normally, the Dark Phoenix would turn around and flee without hesitation when he saw Chao Yuan appear, relying on his superior movement and speed to stay as far away from him as possible. Today was different. It had to stay here to preside over the heavenly slaying formation. More importantly, since it was the master of the heavenly slaying formation, it was confident that it could defeat the other party. Even though he was said to be the strongest man in Chaotian, he had no choice but to be destroyed in the face of this great formation that could alter the passage of heaven and earth. The gale was howling, and the colorful feathers were ruffled by the wind, looking like innumerable wild flowers blooming. A soundless shriek came out from the beak of the Dark Phoenix, spreading toward the surface of the ocean. Those demon beasts, who had long been branded by Taiping Jinren in the depths of their spiritual souls, could not resist the order at all. Drawing countless white lines on the surface of the ocean, they sped up and rushed towards the huge whirlpool. Innumerable deep ditches were left in the blue ocean water, and the backs of the mountain-like demons could be vaguely seen in the ditches. The demons kept on leaping out from the huge transparent walls around the huge whirlpool, heading toward the center of the whirlpool amid the booming sounds of the water. The seawater dropped down like a waterfall, heading toward the deep and gloomy underground. Hundreds of huge rocks were suspended in midair, bearing the impact of the seawater. It seemed that a rainstorm was falling in the distant places. Chow Yuan stood on a rock, suspended in midair. The seawater washed his wounded face, like the rainwater washed a broken Buddha statue. Looking at the demons coming from all directions, Chow Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly. He didn't look solemn. Instead, he looked a bit delighted. The huge body of the Buddha looked small in comparison to those huge demons, and it seemed that he was on the verge of being drowned by them. Crack! An exceedingly bright broadsword light illuminated the bottom of the huge whirlpool and the seawater falling down from the sky. It even shone into the deep part of the ocean, revealing more huge, dark figures. Dozens of painful and despairing screams and muffled, buzzing sounds rang out, suppressing the booming sounds of the seawater in a short time. Countless straight cracks appeared on the smooth skin of those demons, which were as hard as steel, and a great deal of fresh blood shot out from the cracks. The seawater was dyed red instantly. Those demons were turned into meat chunks, falling down into the abyss in tandem. More demons came to the surroundings of the huge whirlpool. They broke through the waterfall like seawater and continued, dashing toward Chow Yuan with the help of the flowing water. Feeling tired, Chow Yuan sat down on the rock suspended in midair and waved his hand a few times. The iron broadsword broke through the air and slashed at the demons who were falling down like flying rocks with a loud boom. The booming sounds sounded like the thunder in the sky, or the sound of the seawater crashing down on the rocks 1,000 feet high, but they were actually the sound of the snowy mountains collapsing. The bright broadsword light traveled around the huge whirlpool at an unimaginably fast speed, forming a white band of light, looking like a flying snowflake. Those demons had incredible strength, and some of them even had magic prowess. Even a swordsman in the broken sea state would have a hard time killing them, but none of them could pass through the broadsword light. The dreadful screams of the demons could be heard amid the booming sounds, and the seawater was dyed red. The seawater was dyed red by the blood, but it was soon diluted by more seawater, turning blue and clear. Soon, it was dyed red again. The deaths in the huge whirlpool didn't stop. Countless demons had been killed by the iron broadsword. The corpses of the demons falling down into the abyss were as numerous as the raindrops. The onlookers wondered if the passage of heaven and earth would be blocked by the falling corpses. The seawater kept flowing down. It was the most magnificent waterfall in this world. Chow Yuan had killed many demons that day, even more than Lu Xi had killed in the muddy river that night. The demons kept jumping out of the ocean and dying one after another. The blood with a fishy smell dyed the seawater red, as well as Chow Yuan's body red. No benevolence could be seen on his face, and no divine intent could be sensed from his body. All he did was kill the demons silently, just like what he had done in the snowland over the years. The seawater splashed into the rocks and the cliff at the bottom of the huge whirlpool, turning into countless foam, looking no different from the snow on the snowland. After a long while, no more demons leaped out of the huge, transparent wall, and the deaths stopped for the time being. The dark clouds gathered again in the high sky, and the sunlight was gone. The rainstorm fell down, and the seawater rumbled. The blood color faded away. Sitting on the floating rocks, Chow Yuan looked like a true Buddha who had seen through the mortal affairs with a calm expression and a calm expression in his eyes. Do you think it's enough? The cold voice of the Dark Phoenix came down from the high sky. It said that the underworld controls the demons to create chaos in Chow Tian, but nobody knows that it's a trick of the immortal. He has been sending these demons to the ground hundreds of years ago to help them multiply in the deep part of the ocean. The number of demons is unimaginably high now. How many more broadswords can you wield? A few hundred? A few thousand? Or tens of thousands? Not to mention that the more demons you kill and the more blood sacrifices you offer, the more powerful the heavenly slaying formation will be. Even if you're Chow Yuan, how long can you hold on? Chow Yuan looked at the top of the huge whirlpool. Countless droplets of blood gradually appeared and connected into countless lines, forming an extremely complicated, evil, and terrifying grand formation. Was this the heavenly slaying formation that the bloody demon church couldn't set up back then? You're the strongest swordsman in the world. Is it worth it to die because of those mortals? The regretful and malicious voice of the Dark Phoenix echoed between the sky and the ocean. More than 10 high-level demonic beasts broke through the waterfall, and with a powerful pressure, they pounced towards the floating reef. Chow Yuan raised his right hand. The iron broadsword flew back. He held the iron broadsword and thrust it into the ground in front of him. The rocks suddenly broke into pieces, shooting out in all directions along with the airwaves. Those demons turned into lumps of flesh again, falling into the abyss along with the bloody rain. It's not a matter of whether it's worth it or not. It's a matter of me. Chow Yuan was covered in blood, looking like a bloody Buddha. Much of the blood belonged to the demons, but some of it was his own. Even though he was the unparalleled broadsword king Chow Yuan, he had paid an unimaginable price to come here from White Town. It was something even Jing Jiu couldn't do. You're a bird, so you don't understand. What I mean is that I'm me this way. Otherwise, I'd be dead. Chow Yuan's voice echoed between the sky and the ocean. It sounded like a bell. Chapter 688. As Chow Yuan and the Dark Phoenix conversed, the demons were still breaking through the ocean water and leaping toward the huge whirlpool, turning into a spray of blood and flesh after being cut by the iron broadsword. Many of the rocks in the air had been shattered and floated in the air. It was an extremely miserable sight. Are you really stupid? Don't you understand what I'm saying? The Dark Phoenix sounded exasperated as he said, "This is a scheme arranged by the immortal. The more demons you kill, the more powerful the heavenly slaying formation will be. Are you going to keep killing until you become a part of the bloody sacrifice?" Chow Yuan said, "I understand what you just said, but it seems that I'm only good at doing these kinds of things, and it seems that I can endure it." The Dark Phoenix demanded icily, "Really? Then I'll let you die now." The aura on the surface of the sea suddenly changed. The lines formed by the blood beads began to release a blinding light. An unimaginably formidable energy headed toward Chow Yuan. This was the force of the heavenly slaying formation that could alter the passage of heaven and earth, but it was used by the Dark Phoenix to deal with Chow Yuan. No matter how powerful Chow Yuan was, how could he resist it? Even if you're the strongest man in Chow Tian and as powerful as Lien Sanyue, what's the point? Those bloody lines extended toward Chow Yuan along with the voice of the Dark Phoenix. Though they didn't travel at a high speed, they seemed to be unavoidable. Chow Yuan had no intention of evading. He pressed his palms together and recited a simple script. Thousands of golden characters floated out of his palms and formed a ring of light that covered his body and blocked the blood threads. With a sizzling sound, there was a faint burning smell, as if the heavenly lightning had struck a 10,000-year-old ancient tree. The blood threads disappeared as soon as they touched the halo, and the halo became thinner at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chow Yuan suddenly said while rubbing his head, "I've just thought that since you're the main controller of the formation, we can dismantle this formation if we kill you." The Dark Phoenix was taken aback at first, but then he sneered, "You're really stupid. It's such a simple idea that you've only figured it out now. The problem is that you can't break the formation. How can you kill me in the formation?" Chow Yuan said, "I'll land at the bottom of the huge whirlpool and try to block this passage." The Dark Phoenix shrieked, "It's impossible. This is the passageway between the heavens and the earth. How can a human be able to block it?" "We have to give it a try," said Chow Yuan. "If the passage is blocked and the seawater can't fall into the underworld, Taiping Jinren will be worried." The Dark Phoenix demanded in a mocking tone, "Are you trying to provoke me to kill you?" Chow Yuan lifted his head and looked at the sky, the blood and seawater dripping down from his mottled face. "Today is your only chance to kill me, the strongest swordsman in the world. Don't you want to try?" The voice of the Dark Phoenix rang out again after a while. "Well, wait for me to kill you." The sanguineous threads above the great maelstrom suddenly vanished as the dark clouds dispersed and sunlight poured down. The seawater continued to fall, forming the most spectacular waterfall in the world. Chow Yuan stood up and looked at the sun in the sky while holding the iron broadsword. A bird flew out of the sun. It was neither the vermilion bird nor the golden crow. It was a blood-red, demonic, and strange bird. The Dark Phoenix had absorbed the energy of countless demons sacrificed by the demons with the help of the heavenly slaying formation. His colorful feathers had been dyed red, and his wings were more than 300 feet long, exuding a formidable energy. He flew toward the great maelstrom, stirring up a great deal of chaotic wind. The demons in the seawater were terrified, fleeing in tandem. This was a foreign object. Looking at the Dark Phoenix in the sky, Chow Yuan displayed a grave expression in his eyes. He was certain that the Dark Phoenix was many times more powerful than when he was in Aoyama. A few moments later, the Dark Phoenix arrived above the great maelstrom, exuding an unimaginably bloody energy and lethal intent. The seawater that had been flowing and falling down over the years seemed to have been suppressed by the Dark Phoenix's formidable energy, turning into a transparent glass. As the only swordsman of the human race who had fought against the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom, Chow Yuan was certain that the Dark Phoenix was not as powerful as the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom at the moment. Chow Yuan held the hilt of his broadsword with his left hand, his countenance grave, but a hint of delight showed in the deep end of his eyes. "Ah, finally, there is someone I can't defeat." As the Dark Phoenix saw Chow Yuan hold the hilt of his broadsword with both of his hands, he felt a thrill in the deep end of his spiritual soul. "Even the strongest swordsman in this world feels uneasy in front of me today." However, in the next moment, the Dark Phoenix felt a dreadful thrill in the deep end of his spiritual soul. The thrill turned into an excruciating pain in the blink of an eye, which kept on tearing his spiritual soul apart. The Dark Phoenix let out a painful shriek as he tumbled around in the sky, the blood-red feathers leaving his body and flying in all directions. The thrill came from the distant Chaotian and Aoyama. It was the feeling he was most familiar with, and also the most fearful of. The green bamboo board was broken into pieces. Jingyang promised him freedom many years ago and took out his blood from the life board. But why could he control the Dark Phoenix by means of a life board? The Dark Phoenix was very powerful that day, and even Chow Yuan had a hard time defeating him. But he couldn't overcome the thrill in the deep end of his spiritual soul. The Dark Phoenix tried his best to steady his mind and flew to the high sky while enduring the excruciating pain. He intended to hide in the deep end of the heavenly slaying formation and see if he could cut off the connection with the life board. A great amount of blood seeped out from his feathers, falling down like raindrops. It was a dreadful scene. The Dark Phoenix's eyes were full of fear and bewilderment, as he had no idea what was going on. In the next moment, he remembered that he had wounded Jingyang in Zhaoga City last year, but he was also wounded by him, and a feather of his tail was left behind. Was it possible that Jingyang had retrieved the feather of his tail and used a certain method to take out the blood and seal it back into the life board? As the Dark Phoenix was thinking of all this, a bright broadsword light rose up from the huge whirlpool. The blood-red feathers fell down again. "Jingyang, you're a liar." The Dark Phoenix let out an angry and painful shriek as he flew to a higher altitude. All of a sudden, a cudgel appeared in the sky. The sky was very large, so it should be easy to evade it, but the cudgel was also very large. The cudgel was 100 feet thick, looking like a huge tree on Penglai Island. It didn't explode on the surface of the ocean until it arrived in front of the Dark Phoenix with a thunderous sound. It was a loud bang. The Dark Phoenix was knocked away by the cudgel, turning into a black speck on the horizon. A dozen blood-red feathers were left drifting in the sky, gradually dispersing. Looking at the scene in the sky, Chow Yuan remarked sentimentally, Jingyang didn't lie. He said there was no need to worry about you. It turns out that there was no need to worry about you at all. A huge dark figure appeared on the surface of the ocean. Boom! An object that looked like a stone pillar fell into the ocean, trampling a few demons to death. The seawater bounced back after hitting the stone wall, forming a few small whirlpools. The flow of seawater flowing forward was much smaller now. Looking down at the small Buddha in the huge whirlpool, the giant asked uncertainly, "Is it Aya?" He had diarrhea today. His stomach kept growling, and he had to go to the toilet all the time. He was even more miserable than the Dark Phoenix. The giant felt a bit itchy. He scratched his back with the stick in his hand. This wooden stick, as big as a huge tree, had knocked the Dark Phoenix in the sky earlier. Now that it had rubbed against his body, it couldn't withstand the force and broke off with a crack. At this time, a demon beast jumped out of the waterfall beside the great whirlpool. Before the giant could react, it turned into a cloud of blood mist and melted into the heavenly slaying formation. This time, the giant only uttered a single word. He was a little startled. The heavenly slaying formation was still working. Countless devil beasts were still swimming over and jumping into the huge whirlpool, sacrificing their blood to the formation. What the Dark Phoenix said to Chow Yuan earlier was correct. Regardless of how much he could kill, he could only make the heavenly slaying formation more powerful. In the end, this formation would kill all the beings around the huge whirlpool. How would the giant solve the problem here? He bent his body and reached his hand into the deep end of the huge whirlpool. He found a piece of wood with a scorched edge and a faint golden intent inside. It was rumored that Penglai Island had experienced a heavenly punishment many years ago. Many divine trees were cut off by the heavenly thunder and drifted into the ocean, eventually falling to the bottom of the huge whirlpool. They were soaked in the ocean water for a great many years and washed by the energy of the huge whirlpool for a great many years, making them stronger. The swordsmen of the Aoyama sect in the heavenly arrival state brought these divine trees back and let them withstand the power of the thunder and lightning on the top of Bihu Peak. They would mature 500 years later and become the rumored Thundersoul Wood. Taiping Jinren had relied on the Thundersoul Wood to escape from the sword jail, and Jingjiu had relied on the Thundersoul Wood to survive. As far as the giant was concerned, the Thundersoul Wood was his most convenient weapon. Back when he intimidated Nanchu on the Foggy Island, he had sat in the ocean for a long time with a piece of Thundersoul Wood in his hand. It was then that another demon broke through the transparent wall of water and fell down. With the Thundersoul Wood in his hand, the giant had no more worries. He wielded the stick casually and knocked the demon away. The demon turned into a black speck and disappeared into the distant horizon. It was thought that he didn't go as far as the Dark Phoenix, but the sputtering demon blood couldn't replenish the heavenly slaying formation either. This was probably what the demon meant by die farther away. In the next moment, more and more demons leaped into the huge whirlpool and were knocked away. After a long while, the number of demons didn't decrease, and none of them could pass the wooden stick and become the blood sacrifice for the heavenly slaying formation. The giant felt bored. He sat down while leaning against the cliff wall of the huge whirlpool. He supported his chin with his left hand and waved the wooden stick casually with his right hand, as if he was swatting flies. Those demons leaped out of the waterfall one after another, and then were knocked to the horizon, turning into a pile of flesh and blood that couldn't be seen. Without the blood supply, the heavenly slaying formation couldn't grow stronger, but it showed no sign of dispersing in a short time. The passage of heaven and earth had changed, and the seawater was still falling down to the underworld. The giant suddenly thought of this matter, a self-blaming expression showing on his face. He walked toward the center of the huge whirlpool after uttering, "Aya." The humans had a question when they discovered the huge whirlpool for the first time many years ago. So much seawater was pouring into the huge whirlpool at every moment, But why didn't the sea level drop? Why didn't the seawater dry up? It was obviously not enough to replenish the seawater by relying on the rivers on Chaotian. Later, the humans discovered two other huge whirlpools similar to the secret realm of Singing Spring, which made them even more puzzled. It wasn't until a long time later that the people found out that the seawater falling down from the huge whirlpool didn't go to the underworld, nor did it go to the empty space. Instead, it went to a distant place through a certain passage, and then came out from that place. No matter how far away it was, the ocean was always connected. As such, the sea level wouldn't rise or fall. Were those passages formed naturally by heaven and earth? There were many conjectures and inferences about this, but no definite answer was available until now. The only thing that could be ascertained was that there were a few exits from those passages, and one of them was under the glacier in the northernmost part of the world, and some of them should be in more distant alien lands. This land didn't have a name. It was because the people living here thought that they were the only intelligent beings in this world, and this land was the only land. If those people knew that there was another land called Chaotian in the distant north, and that there were beings more powerful than them living in Chaotian, what would they think? Up ahead was the ocean over the sea, the most famous scenic spot in this world. Of course, it had been regarded as a miracle by the church a long time ago. The surface of the ocean spanning 100 square miles was much higher than the surface of the sea around it, looking like a magnificent blue sand dune. A great amount of seawater flowed in all directions. The water was gentle, devoid of any violent feeling. Yet if someone dared go to the deep part of the ocean, he would know how powerful the gods were. Usually, the beach here will be full of pious believers kneeling down, praying and praying to the ocean over the sea that was obviously higher than the surface of the sea. However, the beach was deserted that day. It was because the ocean over the sea had disappeared. More than that, the entire surface of the sea was getting lower. The seawater kept receding, exposing more of the beach. A one-armed man with a head full of gray hair stood on the beach, watching this scene with complicated emotions in his eyes. Did something happen in Chaotian? Dozens of cavalrymen of the church arrived at a high speed with the sound of hooves. They dismounted from their horses and knelt down, reporting, "The Pope invites the Master Sword King to return to the church." Chapter 690. The one-armed man didn't turn around. He was still looking at the surface of the ocean in silence. A few cavalrymen of the church looked at the surface of the ocean stealthily, thinking of the recent rumors and the actual order of forbidding the sea. A terrified expression showed on their faces. Where was the sea on the ocean? The one-armed man seemed to be able to hear the thoughts and the minds of these cavalrymen of the church, as he said, "The sea has gone down." The cavalrymen of the church didn't understand what he meant. A leader said again, "The Pope requests the master swordsman to return to the church as soon as possible." The one-armed man said lightly, "That swindler's going to talk about the heavenly punishment again? He just wants to occupy more territory. There's no need to make it so complicated." Hearing this, the leader of the cavalrymen was taken aback a bit, but soon became angry. He stood up and yelled, "Even though you are the master swordsman, you can't be so rude to the Pope." "Do you know my name?" asked the one-armed man. The cavalrymen of the church eyed each other speechlessly. All they knew was that the master swordsman had suddenly appeared in the church city over 100 years ago, but they had no idea about his background. "My name is Jian Shilai." The sunlight shone on the one-armed man's face, which was devoid of any expression, looking like a carved statue. "I thought they would shout out my name when they saw me, when Aoyama was destroyed, but I didn't expect that I would return from the south." He was the former godly swordsman of West Ocean in Chaotian, and now he was the master swordsman of this land. His name had changed over 100 years ago. He was to return to Chaotian that day, so he had to change his name back. "Master, what are you going to do?" The leader of the cavalrymen felt uneasy, saying, "The church has provided for you for over 100 years. Are you going to flee now that the war is about to break out?" The godly swordsman of West Ocean didn't heed him. walking toward the surface of the ocean. The leader of the cavalrymen looked at a priest in the group and gestured with his hands. Crack! A few flashes of lightning struck down from the blue sky like sword lights, hitting the priest and the leader of the cavalrymen precisely. Blood splashed onto the beach like water, but the two of them could no longer be found. Whether it was the knight leader's sword of courage that had been blessed, or the holy artifact that the priest had secretly carried, they had all turned into green smoke. The pale-faced knights of the Vatican knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the man who had walked to the surface of the sea. They did not dare to do anything else. Jian Shalai flew to the surface of the ocean and looked at the deep and dark tunnel at the bottom of the ocean, murmuring to himself, "I wonder if I can make it in time." As soon as he finished speaking, several sword lights floated out from his sleeves and moved forward at lightning speed. He disappeared from the sea. The sea was full of water. Although a great deal of seawater had fallen from the great whirlpool into the underworld, the sea level of the EC had not dropped, and was even as calm as ever, if not for the ripples caused by the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect breaking out of the sea. Many powerful warriors of the Guoqing Temple and the Shui Yu nunnery couldn't withstand the double countercharge caused by the destruction of the restrictive spells and the peerless demonic art. They vomited blood and fell to the ground dead. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect emitted countless streams of gloomy energy, freezing the frost-covered weeds into pieces and burning them into nothingness. As the weeds were all gone, Tong Yin had no place to hide. He coughed incessantly, causing the cliff wall behind him to quiver incessantly. The broken rocks fell down incessantly along with the rustling sounds. A moment ago, he had killed the chief monk of the instruction hall of the Guoqiang Temple by means of the peerless demonic art of the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect, but he himself had been wounded severely. What's the point of doing so much? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said this while laughing. He waved his right hand slightly, and a streak of demonic energy entered the heavenly well through the ground. The ground quaked uneasily, and the stone carvings on the cliff walls faded away again. The seawater was rolling up and down, producing white foam. The 33 levels of heaven had been destroyed, and the heavenly well was broken through. A band of green smoke rose up from the bottom of the cliff, growing thicker and thicker at a visible rate. The green smoke occupied the mountains and fields around the heavenly well at a high speed, and then spread in all directions. The wild rabbits that were trying to survive in the weeds and forests, and the voles that were trying their best to burrow underground, fell down as soon as they touched the green smoke. They twitched painfully for a while, and then died. Innumerable fish also died in the green smoke. They were carried to the surface of the sea by the undercurrents, forming a mass of silvery light. It looked beautiful, but it was actually quite horrifying. The people of the Guoqiang Temple and the Shui Yu nunnery who were still alive looked at the green smoke with despair on their faces. The green smoke had brushed past their bodies with the wind, and they didn't suffer any harm. However, if the green smoke went to the official roads or the villages, what would happen to the mortals? It would be the real doomsday. An old monk of the Guoqing Temple stood up shakily, trying to stop the green smoke for a moment at the cost of his life. Like I said, what's the point? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said expressionlessly while looking at the old monk, "The heavenly well has been opened, and the green smoke has entered the human world. Who can stop it?" No sooner had he finished speaking than the sky responded. It was an extremely loud and clear clap of thunder. A hole appeared in the sky. A large Buddha landed in the empty realm. It was an impartial Buddha. The Buddha happened to land on the heavenly well. The green smoke coming from the underworld to the human world was blocked by his body. Looking at the green smoke covering the mountains and fields and the dead people and living creatures, the Buddha took a deep breath with a compassionate expression on his face. The strong wind blew the green smoke in front of him, and the Buddha inhaled it into his stomach. The belly of the Buddha bulged a bit more. Thinking of the vermilion bird story, the large Buddha blocked the heavenly well tightly, but there was always a crack between the Buddha and the cliff wall, from which the faint green smoke came out. His mottled face was half hidden in the smoke, like a Buddha statue whose paint had been peeled off, giving off an awe-inspiring feeling. Looking at the large Buddha, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "Which temple are you from?" "I've listened to the scriptures in the Guochang temple for many years, but I've never seen you before." "I'm from a small temple in White Town," said the large Buddha. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect folded his hands behind his back and sighed like an old farmer. "Does the broadsword king Chao Yuan look like this?" he asked. "What do I look like?" Chao Yuan asked confusedly. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect remarked with a complicated emotion, "How could you be so fat?" The broadsword king was the most respected swordsman in Chao Tian. Both the mortals and the swordsmen in the cultivation circle had many imaginations about him. If they knew that he looked like such a fat Buddha, they would be disappointed. Chao Yuan felt helpless as well, saying, "I've eaten the quota from the imperial court and the offerings from the Windy Broadsword Church, not to mention the offerings from the temple. How could I not be fat?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect exclaimed resentfully, "You're the broadsword king Chao Yuan. Why can't you control your mouth? Would it kill you to eat less?" Chao Yuan sighed. "If you don't eat more and grow fatter and bigger, you won't be able to fight against her. You have no idea how strong the queen is." Hearing this, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said with a slightly solemn expression, "That's why. I admire you." Chapter 691. In terms of cultivation state, there were a few swordsmen in Chao Tian, like Tan and Bai, Lu Xiai, Jingyang, Tai Pingzhenren, the great grandmaster Nanshu, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean. But in terms of the strongest swordsman in Chao Tian, the broadsword king, Chao Yuan, was second to none. This was the public opinion of the cultivation world, because he was someone who had fought with the queen of the Snowy Kingdom many times and was still alive. Of course, this acknowledgement also reflected the respect that the cultivation world had for him. Solitary blades suppressing wind and snow. These 5 words sounded grand, but in reality, it was extremely difficult to bear. Not everyone could sit in a small temple in White Town for hundreds of years. Only those who could endure this loneliness and pressure could be called saints. Not to mention the cultivators of the Orthodox sects. Even those evil cultivators would admire the Lord Saber Saint. The mysterious dark sect of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had been destroyed by the cooperation of Lu Xiai and Chao Yuan. As such, he didn't admire them, nor did he show any respect to them. It wasn't until he saw their true colors that day. In order to fight against the queen of the Snow Empire, this peerless expert had used crystals, pills, and food to turn herself into a Buddha. It was true that he would not die if he ate a few mouthfuls less, but many more people in the human world might die. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was truly convinced. He said emotionally, "The immortal thought it would be difficult for you to recover from your severe injury, so he didn't count you in this time." Chao Yuan was an honest person, explaining, "Jingyan went to White Town and healed my wound. Do you think I'm an idiot?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said angrily, "Don't you think the immortal knows that he has gone to White Town? The problem is, how did that guy heal your injuries?" Chao Yuan explained again, "He gave some of the fairy energy in his body to me." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect fell silent. He suddenly felt a great deal of admiration for Jingyang, asking, "Could it be that he has predicted all this?" Chao Yuan said, "I asked him the same question at the time, but he said that he didn't calculate anything. All he thought was that he needed to do something." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked confusedly, "If he didn't predict it, why did you leave White Town in advance?" "I left this morning," said Chao Yuan. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect felt that he was being insulted. "Even if you're the thoughtless sword, you can't be so fast," he said in a low voice. "If you didn't set off in advance, how did you get here?" Pointing to the deep part of the ocean, Chao Yuan said, "I came from the Singing Spring." The expression on the face of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect changed slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked uncertainly. "The heavenly slaying formation is indeed troublesome, which is why I came here a bit late," said Chow Yuan. The black dark ancestor felt increasingly incredulous. "You said you left Y-Town today, went to the great maelstrom, broke the heavenly passage formation, and came here." Chow Yuan was an honest person. He realized what Jing Jiao didn't understand by now, explaining, "The immortal Jingyang taught me the control of soul fire. Back when Jing Jiao learned the control of soul fire from the king of the underworld in the fiend prison, he was able to practice the underworld fairy sword. Though he could conceal it from the people in the world, he couldn't conceal it from Taiping Jinren. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and Taiping Jinren had traveled in the world for more than 100 years, so they knew about it as well. "You're a human, not a sword body like his. How could you learn it?" he asked bewilderedly. Chow Yuan put his palms together and uttered the name of Buddha, saying, "I'm a golden body." The heavy rain fell on the top of Tianguang Peak, making pattering sounds. The cultivation practitioners of various sects had fled to the sky a long time ago, except for Guangyuan Jinren, Nan Wang, Zhao Leiyu, and the others. The round turtle's eyes were still closed when the lightning illuminated the pine and cypress trees and the stone monument, as if he could pretend that he didn't know what was happening. At least, he didn't need to see the two brothers. The two figures by the cliff's edge were still confronting each other. The inherited heaven sword was absolutely quiet, but the peaks of Aoyama were in a mess, with the cliffs collapsing everywhere. The snow on Shangda Peak had already reached the windowsills, and the icicles hanging in the manor cave looked like swords. A person can defeat a world, like what Lu Ci did before he left, but it's hard to destroy a world. The lightning illuminated Jing Jiao's face, and his eyes became exceedingly bright and sharp. He said to Taiping Jinren, "It's because this world is alive, not sand or mud. It won't change its shape as you wish." The heavy rain falling from the sky was also illuminated by the lightning. The raindrops looked as beautiful as the pearls in Tahiti, exuding a dazzling and translucent glow. A water droplet broke in his palm, wetting the already broken emerald green bamboo tablet and the black feather hidden in it. Taiping Jinren gazed at Jing Jiao's palm. A moment later, he sighed and said in a sentimental tone, "You've used it after all. I wanted this bamboo boar back then because I wanted it to be of some use." Jing Jiao tossed the broken pieces of the bamboo board and the feather to the foot of the cliff. Taiping Jinren said, "Even if you can predict the Dark Phoenix, you still can't solve the problem there." You had a lot of friends in the world back then. Both the king of the underworld and the caretakers of the regular cultivation sects could be your friends. "You wanted me to make more friends," Jing Jiao continued after a pause. "I don't have many friends until now, but they are all very useful." The heavy rain suddenly slanted slightly, and the energy of heaven and earth had changed somewhat. A faint sound could be heard somewhere in the distance. The faint sound sounded like a sigh, like a fan being torn apart, or like a finger caressing a gray wall. Taiping Jinren looked in the direction of the East Ocean and remained silent for a long time. "Who is over there?" he asked suddenly. "Chow Yuan," answered Jing Jiao. Taiping Jinren sighed as he wiped the rainwater off his face with his hand, saying, "I'm friends with Emperor Shao, but I regard him as a dog. I thought that he would find some time to bite back at me, but he didn't. On the contrary, he became more and more interesting." "Do you know why?" Jing Jiao said, "I can roughly guess. It's because he believes in my reasoning and thinks what I'm doing is interesting. Not only this old dog, but also those people of various cultivation sects think the same." Taiping Jinren turned around and asked while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes, "I still don't understand why you don't believe in what I've said since I brought you up and taught you by me." The rainwater landed on the slightly dark face. It was the face of Lu Shui, but the worried expression on his face and the heavy sense of responsibility belonged to Taiping Jinren. It was the same as before. At the moment, Jing Jiao looked like an old farmer who was dealing with the flood at the breach of a river dam. "You're the flood," not the one dealing with the flood. Jing Jiao said. Chao Yuan is the one dealing with the flood. Taiping Jinren thought of a possibility, asking, did you teach him the control of soul fire? But how could he learn it? When the river dam collapsed and the flood was about to drown the whole human world, a large Buddha would block the breach. Jing Jiao continued, he is that Buddha. He has cultivated the golden body a long time ago. Taiping Jinren asked after a moment of silence, how did you cure his wound? I gave him some fairy energy, said Jing Jiao. Taiping Jinren arched his eyebrows slightly, as if he had heard the most unbelievable thing in the world. Don't you want to ascend anymore? He asked. Jing Jiao said, I went to see him because I was thinking about what would happen after I ascended. When Taiping Jinren was thinking about the destruction of the world, he was thinking about what would happen to the world after he left. As such, he went to see Chao Yuan and another person. Chapter 692. Oh, that's why. Standing in the ocean wind, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said sentimentally while stroking his sparse hair, it's really unfair. Chao Yuan was the strongest swordsman in Chao Tian, and he had cultivated the golden body, obtained a fairy energy in Jingyang's body, and learned the control of soul fire. How could Chao Yuan fight against him? Drop the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. Chao Yuan said to him, as long as you're willing, you can cultivate the golden body at any time. This was the intention of persuading him to surrender. It's too hard, and I've always thought it was unreasonable. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect went on, if we could become a Buddha this way, we would have to pick up the butcher's knife first. After some thought, Chao Yuan said, it's indeed unreasonable. I take it back. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect laughed out loud. I've never seen an interesting and honest person like you. Chao Yuan said, I think you're right. This fight is indeed unfair. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect stopped smiling as he said, the world is unfair to begin with. The orthodox cultivation sects all have the best spiritual sources, but we only have the impure ones. We have no choice but to adopt other methods, which is why we're the deviant sects in your eyes. It's not fair for the Guoqing Temple to let the monk doctors use their own Zen methods to cure the mortals. Chao Yuan was baffled, asking, saving the dying and helping the injured, and the strong helping the weak. Isn't this the remedy for the unfairness? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said seriously, the mortals are born, grow old, and die of sickness. Why do you want the monks of the temple to cure them? Others admire you, but I don't. Have you ever asked them whether the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is willing to ascend with the cultivation practitioners or to be consumed on the rotten sores and white bones for the mortals to live? Have you ever asked the monks of the temple if they are willing to do so? Even if only one of them doesn't want to do so for a moment, you're treating him unfairly. Feeling surprised, Chao Yuan exclaimed, so you really believe what Taiping Jinren said? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect spat on the ground, creating a small hole on the cliff rock. If I didn't believe in the immortal, I wouldn't have followed him around for so many years. Chao Yuan remarked sentimentally, the whole of the cultivation circle is waiting to see when you will deliver a fatal blow to him. But they have misjudged you. After Ko Qintong died in Zhaoga City, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was the only deviant figure in the world. No one believed that such a big shot would be willing to be Taiping Jinren's dog. They all thought that he was forced to serve Taiping Jinren because of the threat of the Aoyama sword formation. In my life, I've been arrogant, I've been glorious, and I've also been miserable. Everyone says that the kid over there is the best at digging holes in the world, but how can he compare to me? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect squinted at the scenery on the ocean. Through his sparse hair, he saw a ship in the distance. It seemed that the ship was heading to a faraway place, but it was unknown where it was headed. Countless scenes from the past hundreds of years flashed through his sparse hair, gradually merging with the ship on the surface of the sea and disappearing into the distance. Those scenes were either cruel and evil or arrogant and arrogant, but most of them were dark. It was a place where the sun couldn't be seen, and not even the lava could be seen. All he could do was rely on his spiritual awareness to find the way and dig the soil and rocks with his bare hands to evade the search of the Aoyama sword formation. As he went deeper and deeper into the underground, he had almost lost his way many times. It was a feeling that he would never be able to find his way out. When he heard the flute outside the cliff the other day and learned the identity of the other party, he didn't feel resentful. Instead, he felt like weeping bitterly. As long as he could get out of the underground and see the sun again, he would do anything. Of course, nobody was willing to be a dog, not to mention that he was a grandmaster who had commanded the swordsmen of the deviant sections. Following by Tai Pingzhenren's side, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was always looking for an opportunity to deliver a fatal blow to him. For instance, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect in the Guoqing temple and the fat monk who looked like a hoof had failed. Should he keep trying? As people had guessed, he stared at the back of Tai Pingzhenren with a green glow in his eyes and saliva dripping down from the corners of his mouth. He was ready to bite Tai Pingzhenren's ankle and drag him into the bottomless abyss. This dog wandered the world with Tai Pingzhenren. Later, he had another chicken, so they continued to wander the world. They wandered and wandered. This old dog was indeed very old. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect didn't tell Chao Yuan what he had experienced over the years, because it was unnecessary and ridiculous. He took out an alcohol jar and a ceramic cup from his sleeve and poured a cup of dark green wine into the cup. He brought the cup to his lips and drank it slowly. Then he sighed contentedly and said with a hint of intoxication, "I haven't been to the upper world, so I don't know if what the immortal said is true. But I think what he said is interesting, and it's an interesting experience over the last 100 years, and the wine is really tasty." Do you think I care if the human race will be wiped out or not? I'm a cannibal, okay? I just think it's an important matter, so important that I can forget about those fears. What kind of fears? Asked Chao Yuan while looking at him. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect threw the alcohol jar and the wine cup to the other side of the cliff, saying, "The purpose of cultivation is to transcend life and death, and the purpose of the mortal's religious belief is to transcend life and death. The purpose and meaning of all the actions were ultimately related to life and death." Chao Yuan understood what he meant and said slowly, "Everything is like you, the bubble and the illusion of thunder and lightning." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect didn't let Chao Yuan finish, as he yelled sternly, "Don't tell this old man that everything is empty and that it's the perception of the practitioners. I've listened to the scripts in the Guoqing temple for dozens of years, and I know as much as you do. All I know is that no matter what the Buddhas think or what others think, I'm me, and my existence is my existence. Knowing that I can't ascend and seeing the dark night ahead, this old man is of course afraid." After a long moment of silence, Chao Yuan said, "That's why you have to do it." "That's right, the destruction of the world. Do you think it's a joke?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect let out a hoarse and unpleasant laugh. "Why are the scholars of Yamatai willing to die for their country? Why are those orthodox cultivation practitioners willing to sacrifice themselves for their sects? It's because they have a belief in their hearts, which can help them overcome the fear of life and death." The voice of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect grew lower and lower. "I know it's stupid and unreasonable, but it's really useful, very useful." Chao Yuan asked him earnestly, "Do you still have fear now?" "A little bit." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect breathed a bit faster. He said while staring at Chao Yuan, "Fortunately, you're the strongest swordsman in Chaotian. Fighting with you will excite me and make me forget those things." "Okay," said Chao Yuan. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, "Come on, raise the broadsword in your hand and help me overcome this fear." Having said that, his body was no longer hunched, but grew taller and taller. A flash of broadsword light illuminated the East Ocean. There was a soft clank sound. It sounded like a human's finger brushing over the hard rocks at the bottom of the coal mountain. It sounded like a cloth being torn apart. It sounded like a sigh. It sounded extremely pitiful. It's just a broken jar. The voice doesn't have so many meanings. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said this while covering his ears with his hands. He looked like a playful and timid child who had lit up the firecrackers and was startled by the thunder in the sky. Some black smoke seeped out from the gaps between his fingers, and a red color could be seen in the deep end of the smoke. The black smoke started burning fiercely as soon as it landed on the ground, and a low explosive sound could be heard. It should be caused by the rapid expansion of an ice core at a very low temperature. Chow Yuan felt sentimental while looking at him, not knowing what to say. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said while covering his ears, "You're so powerful, but you're beaten up by the queen of the snowy kingdom every time. How powerful is that person?" Chow Yuan couldn't bear it, saying, "You're going to die soon. Why are you still concerned about this? Be careful. Press your hands harder." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.